40 wolves watched their alpha reach into her chest and tear the bond out. She hit the stone floor. Nobody moved. 6 months later, a rider comes through the dead woods and drops an invitation on her chopping block. He wants her to stand in the crowd and watch him marry another woman. But somebody in that hall nodded first. She crosses the mountains to disappear forever and finds a king by a fire instead. Under her enemy's fortress, 800 sets of armor hanging in the dark. 600 warhorses nobody rides. 7 packs erased from a guest list. She climbs down ivy at midnight, counts them twice, and understands what a wedding really is. Gates slam. The bar drops. 40 archers rise on the wall. 12 alphas stand bare-armed around a black stone. He told 40 people she was too small to notice. He handed her an inventory. Who's the weak wolf now? The axe came down. Crack. The pine log split clean. 2 halves. They fell away from each other like they'd been waiting 300 years for permission. Nell Ashgrove reached for another. Set it on the block. Squared her shoulders. Swung. Crack. The sound went out across the dead woods and came back smaller. That was winter in the fringe lands. It ate noise. It ate everything. Sound. Warmth. People. She'd been out here 6 months, and the woods had eaten most of her already. Crack. Her breath came out in white plumes. The morning air had that particular bite to it, the kind that gets into your teeth. Pine sap. Cold iron. The metal flat smell that comes before snow. She was sweating. In this cold. Sweating. Good. Because sweat meant the muscle was working. And when the muscle was working, the other thing shut up. The other thing being the ache. It sat behind her collarbone. Deep. Dull. A throb with a heartbeat of its own, like something had died in there and hadn't finished dying. 6 months. You'd think 6 months would be enough. Crack. She was 26 years old, and she had learned exactly one useful thing in her life, which was this: you cannot outrun pain. But you can outwork it. You can bury it under enough cordwood that it stops being able to breathe. So she chopped. Every morning. Before light. Until her hands went numb, and her shoulders screamed, and the stack behind the cabin got so high it started blocking the window. She had more firewood than a woman alone could burn in 4 winters. She didn't stop. The hoofbeats came at 9:30. She heard them before she saw him. Heavy. Shod. A big animal, walking careful on frozen ground. Not a scout's horse. Not a hunter's. Somebody with money. Nell leaned on the axe handle and waited. She didn't hide. She didn't reach for a weapon. Because what was the point? The rider broke the tree line, and she knew him before she saw his face. She knew him from the shape of his shoulders in the saddle. Bram Coyle. 50 years old, and built like a barn door. Beta of the Blackmore pack. The man who'd taught her which berries were safe when she was 19 and new and stupid and in love. He was wearing a good wool cloak. Sable lining. Silver clasp. Blackmore was doing well, then. Nell wiped a streak of dirt off her forehead with the back of one hand. Her hands were a wreck. Calloused across the palm, split at the knuckles, a smear of pine tar under 2 nails that had been there since November. She watched him dismount. She didn't say anything. Because there was nothing to say to Bram Coyle. Not anymore. He walked toward her, through the snow, and his boots were polished, and the polish was ruined instantly, and she watched him notice that, and watched him decide not to care, and something in her almost laughed. Almost. Nell, he said. Bram. Her voice came out wrong. scratched, bent. She hadn't spoken out loud in 19 days. She'd counted. Not on purpose. It just happened the way counting happens, when there's nothing else to do. He winced at the sound of it. She saw him wince. She filed that away. "You're a long way from the high hall," she said. "Did you get lost looking for the privy?" He didn't laugh. He never laughed. Not at her jokes. Not at anybody's. In 3 years living in that fortress she had seen Bram Coyle smile exactly twice, and both times it had been at a funeral, which, in retrospect, maybe should have told her something. He reached inside the cloak. Pulled out a thick envelope. Heavy vellum. Cream-colored. The kind of paper that costs more than a week of a hunter's wages. He held it out. Held it out like it was hot. Like it might go off. "Aldrich sent me," he said. "He wants you to have this." Nell looked at it. She didn't move. Because she already knew. Of course she knew. The whole territory knew. There wasn't a wolf between the ridge and the river who hadn't heard. Aldrich Marchetti. Alpha of Blackmore. 3 years in the chair, and finally making the move everyone said he should have made from the start. Taking a proper mate. Autoline vein of Ironvale. Old blood. Real blood. A pedigree that ran back 4 centuries, without a single half-breed smudging the line. Everything Nell wasn't. "Put it on the block," Nell said. Her voice had nothing in it. Nothing at all. She'd checked. She'd gone looking, actually, in the seconds before she spoke, reached down into herself to see what was there, expecting rage or grief, or at minimum a decent bitterness. Nothing. Just cold. Just the deep flat cold of a woman who'd run out of tears in the spring and never restocked. Bram swallowed. She watched his throat move. He stepped forward. Set the invitation on the tree stump. Right next to her axe. Nice touch, she thought. The paper and the blade, side by side. Somebody should paint that. He expects you to attend, Nell. She let out a sound. Not a laugh. Something with the shape of a laugh, and none of the contents. Does he? What for? Does he need somebody to pour the wine? Don't do that. And there it was. Bram finally looked at her. Actually looked. Right in the eye, for the first time since he'd ridden out of the trees. And in his eyes there was pity. Pity. She hated him for it, so hard and so fast that for 1 second the ache behind her collarbone lit up like a struck match. He just wants to show the Allied packs there's no bad blood, Bram said. That the transition was peaceful. Peaceful. Nell's hand went to her collarbone. She didn't tell it to. It just went the way a tongue goes to a missing tooth. Under the wool she could feel it. The scar. Pale. Jagged. Raised at the edges, where the skin had healed rough, because nobody had stitched it, because nobody stitches a rejection, because that would imply it was a wound, and not a correction. Peaceful. He had done it in front of the entire pack council. Standing on the stone floor of the great hall, with 40 wolves watching. He had listed her failures out loud like a man reading a shopping list. Weak wolf. No noble blood. Cannot command respect. And then he had reached into her chest and torn the bond out, with all the grace of a butcher who's late for lunch, and she had gone down on the stones, and the last thing she remembered, before the black came, was the sound. Not his voice. The sound of 40 people not saying anything. Tell Aldrich, she said, that he can take his peaceful transition and choke on it. Bram sighed. White vapor. He looked tired suddenly. Old. If you don't show, it looks like defiance. You know how he gets. He could revoke your right to the fringe lands. He could exile you outright. I am exiled, Bram. She picked the axe back up. I'm just doing it inside his borders. He stood there. He stood there a second too long, and she understood exactly what he was waiting for. He was waiting for her to break. Or maybe, and this was the worst possibility, the one that made her jaw tighten, maybe he was waiting for absolution. Maybe he'd ridden 4 hours, through frozen woods hoping she'd say it's all right, Bram, you couldn't have stopped it, nobody could have stopped it. So she set another log on the block. And she swung. Crack. The halves flew. One of them hit his polished boot. Bram Coyle turned around, and got on his horse, and rode away, without another word. When the hoofbeats faded she dropped the axe. Her hands were shaking. Stop it. They kept shaking. Stop. She looked at them like they belonged to somebody else, this pair of split, filthy, useless things trembling at the ends of her arms, and she thought, very clearly. This is what you are now. You're a woman who shakes at paper. She walked to the stump. She picked it up. The wax seal was red. Deep red. Thick enough that it had a weight to it, and it had been stamped, with the Blackmore crest, the snarling wolf, teeth out, the one she used to sew, onto his cloaks, when the thread came loose, back when there was a his, back when there was a she who sewed. She broke it. The seal cracked in half, and the 2 pieces fell, into the snow, and she didn't pick them up. Inside, gold ink. Looping calligraphy. Some poor scribe had spent an entire day on this. The union of Alpha Aldrich Marchetti and Lady Adeline Vane. 10 days hence, at the Moonstone. And at the bottom. At the bottom, in his own handwriting, sharp, aggressive, slanting hard to the right the way it always did, when he was angry, which meant he'd written this angry, which meant he'd been thinking about her. Your presence is required. It is time you accepted your place. Nell stood in the snow, and read it 4 times. And here's the thing she understood, standing there with the wind cutting through her sweater, and the invitation shaking in her ruined hands. He didn't want her there for the optics. He wanted her there, so Adeline could see her. He wanted the new one to look across a crowded hall, and lay eyes on the dirt-stained, hollow-cheeked, half-blood wreck he'd thrown out, and understand, all the way down in her bones, exactly what she'd been chosen over. You elevate a woman by showing her what you discarded. That's the whole trick. Nell went inside. The cabin was 1 room. Fire dying in the hearth. A bed with 3 blankets that had never once been enough. A wash basin. A cracked mirror above it. She looked at the invitation. Then at the embers. It would make excellent kindling. She didn't burn it. Instead, and she couldn't have told you why, not then, she walked over to the mirror. And she looked. Really looked. For the first time in months. Hollow cheeks. Dark craters under the eyes. Hair like something a bird had abandoned. A wool sweater, with 2 holes in the shoulder, that smelled like smoke and wet dog and, underneath that, faintly, like a person who had stopped bathing regularly, because there was no one to bathe for. She looked exactly like what he wanted her to be. That was the part that did it. Not the rejection. Not the scar. Not 6 months of frozen mornings. It was standing in front of a cracked mirror, and realizing she had spent half a year becoming his argument. He'd said she was worthless. And she'd gone out, into the woods, and built a very convincing exhibit. Something turned over inside her chest. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot. Rage is what young wolves feel, and it burns out in a week, and she'd had hers back in the spring, and it hadn't accomplished a thing. This was cold. This was the flat, arithmetic, 4 in the morning cold of a woman doing math, and not liking the answer. Because if she stayed out here, and rotted quietly, and let the woods finish eating her. He won. He won permanently. Forever. In the ledger of the world it would simply say, he was right about her. My place, she said out loud, to the empty room. Her voice sounded terrible. She folded the invitation. Put it in her pocket. She wasn't going to the wedding. She was going to leave. She'd cross the High Ridge Pass, out of Blackmore territory, gone. Permanently. And she'd do it on the day of his bonding, so that at the exact moment he stood at that black stone and took a new mate, her scent would go out of his lands like a candle. Let him feel that. Let him feel the finality of it. She pulled a rucksack off the hook. She started to pack. 3 years ago. The kitchen. His kitchen, the big one behind the great hall, at some hour of the night that didn't have a name. He was sitting on the floor. Alpha Aldrich Marchetti, 27 years old, 6 weeks into the chair his father had died in, sitting on a stone floor, with his back against a cabinet and flour up to his elbows. There'd been an argument about bread. She didn't remember the argument. She remembered the flour. I'm going to raise the timber levy, he'd said. No, you're not. Nell. You're not. She'd been sitting across from him. Also on the floor. Also covered in flour. The Eastern crofters are already at 40%. You raise it, and they'll starve by March, and then you'll have to send men to make them not starve, and then you'll have spent more on soldiers than you made on timber. It's stupid. Silence. And then this thing happened. This thing that happened maybe 6 times in 3 years, and that she would think about, later, in a cold cabin, more than she thought about almost anything else. He tilted his head. And he said, huh? Just that. Huh? And then he said, all right. I won't. That was the whole thing. He'd been about to do something stupid, and she'd said no, and he'd said huh, and he hadn't done it. He'd flicked flour at her. She'd laughed so hard she'd cracked her head on the cabinet door. That's what she'd loved. Not the shoulders. Not the title. The huh. 6 months ago. The great hall. Stone floor. 40 wolves. And Nell, standing in the middle, watching him. Watching him hesitate. Because he did hesitate. She's certain of that much. Even later, even after everything, she'd be certain. He stood there for 8 full seconds, and he didn't move, and his hands were open at his sides, and there was something on his face that she'd never seen before and couldn't name. And then he looked to his left. Just a flick of the eyes. Barely anything. Off to the side, past the council benches, to where the shadows were. And somebody there? Somebody nodded. Nell didn't see it. Nell was watching his face. And then he came across the floor, and he put his hand on her chest, and he pulled, and the world went white, and she was on the stones, and that was the end of everything. The high ridge is treacherous in high summer. In the grip of early winter it is a death sentence, with a nice view. Nell had been walking for 2 days. Her boots were done. The leather had cracked across the toe on the first morning, and now every step was a small cold flood. She'd stopped feeling her feet somewhere around noon on day 1, which she knew was bad, and had decided not to think about, which she knew was worse. The wind came through the narrow passes like it had a grudge. Not blowing. Cutting. Carrying ice in it, fine as sand, that got into her eyes, and her collar, and the seams of everything she owned. She was hungry. She'd snared a snow hare the first night, a skinny thing, more fur than meat, and she'd eaten all of it, including things you don't normally eat, and it hadn't been close to enough. She was burning through herself. She could feel it. Her body eating its own walls to keep the fire going. And her wolf. Her wolf was quiet. That was the worst part. A wolf is supposed to be a furnace. A second heartbeat. When you're cold, she warms you. When you're scared, she wakes up and starts counting exits. Hers was curled in a ball somewhere in the back of her skull. Small. Silent. Still concussed from the bond tearing 6 months back, and not interested in coming out. Come on, Nell thought at her. Come on. I need you. Nothing. I know he hurt you. He hurt me too. Get up. Nothing. She kept walking. Dusk on the second day. The sky went that particular color, bruise purple, the color of a thumbnail you've hit with a hammer, and Nell understood, in a very calm and detached way, that she had maybe 2 hours. 2 hours to find shelter. Or she was going to sit down. And that was the thing about freezing. She'd seen it happen once, to a trapper, when she was small. You don't collapse. You don't scream. You just get tired. You get comfortable. You sit down for a second, just a second, and the cold is suddenly warm, and everything is fine, and it's the best you've felt all day. And then you're a shape under the snow until spring. She smelled the smoke, before she saw the fire. Wood smoke. Not a forest burn. Controlled. Steady. Pine and dry oak, the mix you use, when you actually know what you're doing. Nell dropped into a crouch behind a snow-draped boulder, and every hair on her body stood up. And then, finally, her wolf opened one eye. Mail. Big. Not ours. Because there was no pine and iron underneath it. No Blackmore. Whoever was down there wasn't Pack. A rogue. A rogue in the mountains would kill her for her boots. Except her boots were garbage. Except freezing to death was a certainty, and a rogue was only a probability, and Nell Ashgrove had spent 6 months learning to do exactly that kind of math. She slid the hunting knife out of her belt. And she went forward. Through a break in the rocks, a clearing. Sheltered by an overhang of black stone. Out of the wind. A fire in the center, going merry and hot. And a man on a log. He wasn't what she expected. He wasn't starving. That was the first thing. Rogues are lean in a specific way, a hunted way. This man was massive. Shoulders like a doorframe under a heavy leather coat that had seen 10 winters and won all of them. Dark hair tied back. Rough beard. Long legs stretched toward the flames. He was turning a spit. Venison. The smell hit her, and her stomach cramped, so hard she nearly made a noise. He didn't look tense. He didn't look watchful. He looked like a man who'd been sitting by fires his whole life, and had never once been interrupted in a way he couldn't handle. Back away, she thought. Just back away. She shifted her weight. Her boot came down on a dry twig under the snow. Crack. In that silence it sounded like a rifle. And here's what he did. He didn't jump. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't scramble. He didn't even turn his head fast. He just stopped turning the spit. And looked directly at the boulder she was behind. His eyes caught the firelight, and they were amber. Not brown. Amber. Like something burning behind glass. If you're going to stab me, he said, do it quickly. His voice was a deep gravel baritone that seemed to come up out of the ground. If you're just hungry, come sit down. He went back to turning the spit. The deer was too big for one anyway. Nell didn't move. Her grip on the knife had gone white. I can hear your stomach from here, he added. Dryly. She came out. Slow. Knife visible. Angled down but ready, the way you carry it, when you want a man to understand that you're not threatening him, you're informing him. She walked into the light. He looked her up and down. And this is what saved him, honestly. This is why she sat down. Because his gaze was analytical. Not leering. Not pitying. He took in the ruined boots, the shaking frame, the sweater with the holes. And then he saw the scar. Her collar had slipped. There it was, pale, jagged, ugly, right at the base of her throat. His eyes stopped there for about half a second. And then moved on. He didn't ask. He didn't ask. And Nell, who had spent 6 months being asked, by everyone, in every possible tone, from Bram's pity to the baker's wife's disgusting delighted sympathy, felt something in her chest unclench about 1 degree. "Put the knife away," he said. He gestured at a flat stone across the fire. "I'm Rurik. Sit. Warm yourself." She sheathed the knife. She kept her hand near it. She sat. The heat hit her like a wall, and it was, without exaggeration, the single best thing that had happened to her since the spring. "Nell," she said. He nodded. He reached over. Cut a thick slab off the roast, with a hunting knife that could have gutted a horse. Held it out to her on the flat of the blade. She took it. It burned her fingers. She didn't care. She tore into it like an animal. It was the best thing she had ever tasted in her entire life. They ate in silence for a long time. Fire crack. Wind howl, up above the overhang, going somewhere else. "You're traveling light for a mountain crossing," he said eventually, wiping grease out of his beard. "And you've got no pack scent." "I prefer to travel alone." Defensive. Immediately. She heard it in her own voice, and hated it. "A lone wolf in Blackmore territory," he said. He was looking at the fire, not at her. "Aldrich Marchetti doesn't usually tolerate strays near his border." Nell went still at the name. Every muscle. All at once. "I'm not a stray. I'm leaving." Rurik leaned back. Crossed his long legs at the ankle. Studied her in the flicker. "Leaving in a hurry. Into a blizzard. A beat. Running from something. Or someone. Neither." She stared into the flames. "Just realized there's nothing behind me worth standing still for." And he said, "A broken bond is a hard thing to carry." Her head snapped up. "I didn't ask for your sympathy. I didn't offer any." Flat. Even. No edge at all. Sympathy's useless. It doesn't keep you warm, and it doesn't feed you. I was stating a fact. Nell looked at him. And something in her, something that had been braced like a fist for 6 months, loosened. Just slightly. Because that was exactly right. That was exactly, precisely right, and nobody had said it to her, not once, in half a year of people arranging their faces into concern. "It's an old wound," she said. "It doesn't hurt anymore." It was a lie. They both knew it was a lie. "If it doesn't hurt," Rurik said, "why are you dying on the high ridge instead of taking the main road?" Nell pulled her knees up to her chest. And here's the part she'd think about later. She wanted to talk. She wanted to. To this enormous stranger with the amber eyes. Maybe because he hadn't asked about the scar. Maybe because he'd said sympathy was useless, and meant it. Maybe it was just that she was warm for the first time in 2 days, and warmth makes people stupid. "Because the main road goes through the capital," she said. "And the capital's busy. Getting ready for a wedding." His eyebrows went up. "Ah. The Alpha's bonding. You know about it. Word travels. It's a significant union." He poked the fire with a stick. Sparks went up in a spiral. Marchetti of Blackmore and Vane of Ironvale. Consolidation of power on the southern border. He said it the way a man reads a map. Then, without looking at her. "You were his mate." Not a question. He'd put it together. The scar. The location. The direction she was walking. The way her whole body had turned to wood when he said the name. "I was," Nell said. "Until I wasn't." She heard how flat her own voice was. I'm a half-blood. My wolf's small. I don't look good in silk, and I don't know how to play politics. So he threw me out to make room for someone who does. And now he marries her, Rurik said. Thoughtful. And you freeze on a mountain. Nell reached into her pocket. Pulled out the invitation, creased now, damp at one corner, carried across 40 miles of ice for no reason she could articulate. She flicked it into the dirt by the fire. He requested my presence. To watch. To accept my place. Rurik picked it up. He read the note at the bottom. And he laughed. It was not a nice sound. It was low and dark and it went through Nell like cold water. Arrogant. Petty, Nell corrected. Both, he agreed. And then he looked at her. And his eyes had changed. The firelight was in them, and something else was in them too, and it was intelligence. Hard and sudden and unpleasant, like finding out the friendly dog in the yard is actually a wolf, and has been the whole time. Are you going to let him get away with it? I'm leaving. That's me not playing his game. Running is exactly his game, Nell. Sharp. It proves him right. It proves you were weak. It proves you couldn't take it, and you scurried off, into the dark like a beaten cur, and every wolf in that hall gets to say, well, he did try to invite her. Nell's pride went up like dry grass. What would you have me do? March in there in rags? Demand a seat at the high table? I have no power. I have no pack. If I go, all I do is hand him the satisfaction of breaking me in public. What if you didn't walk in as a discarded mate? Softly. What if you walked in as someone untouchable? Nell scoffed. And how do I manage that magic? Rurik stood up. And stood up isn't the word. He unfolded. He kept going. He was enormous, his head and shoulders over the fire, his shadow going up the rock wall behind him, and bending at the top, and the flames suddenly seemed very small. He reached into the coat. He tossed something across the fire. Nell caught it out of reflex. It was heavy. It was gold. She opened her hand. A medallion. Old. Intricate. A wolf's head, crowned with winter thorns. The crest of the Alpha King. Her breath stopped in her throat. Her eyes came up. And she looked at the man standing over the fire in a beaten leather coat, with a beard like a woodcutter, and a horse she hadn't even seen, and every piece of the last hour rearranged itself. You're. She couldn't finish it. My name is Rurik Vance, he said. And his voice. His voice did something. It didn't get louder. It got deeper, it dropped through some floor and landed somewhere underneath the world, and it carried a weight of command, so absolute that the small dormant thing in the back of Nell's skull whimpered. Her wolf. Awake. Awed. Terrified. King of the Northern Territories. Nell was on her feet. She didn't remember standing. The medallion was burning a hole in her palm. She started to lower her head. Bare her throat. The instinct is in every wolf ever born. You don't decide to do it any more than you decide to blink. Don't. She froze. Rurik came around the fire. I have enough people bowing to me, he said. I've got a hall full of them. They bow so hard they can't see where they're walking. He stopped a few feet off. And he looked at her. And here it is. Here's the part where the story turns, and everything after it goes a different way. Because Nell Ashgrove looked back at the King of the North, and she did the math. Fast. He knew who Aldrich was. He knew about the wedding. He knew the phrase consolidation on the southern border, which is not how you describe a party, it's how you describe a threat. He's not passing through. He's going down there. And he's alone on a mountain in a beat-up coat, with no banners, which means he doesn't want anybody to know he's coming, which means he doesn't have anyone inside. She looked down at the medallion. Then back up. And she said, "You're going to the wedding." Rurik's jaw tightened. Just slightly. "I received an invitation as well." "That's not what I asked." Silence. The fire popped. "Yes," he said. "Why?" "That's not your business." "It's about to be." And that stopped him. That got his eyebrows up. "Because he's getting too big," Nell said. She was talking fast now. It was coming up out of her like water out of a broken pipe. "Blackmore and Iron Vale together, that's the two largest packs on your southern line. That's the trade roads. That's the timber. That's, what, a third of your military reserve? Sitting under one roof, married." Rurik said nothing. "And he sent you an invitation. Which isn't a request for a blessing. It's a summons. He wants his allied alphas to watch him pull the king down off the mountain. He wants to stand next to you and look like your equal." Still nothing. But he'd gone very, very still. "And you're going," Nell said. "Which means you think there's something under it. Something worse than vanity. Except you don't know what. Because if you knew what, you'd have brought an army instead of a deer." The wind went over the top of the overhang. Rurik Vance looked at a 26-year-old half-blood in ruined boots, and did not say a word for 11 seconds. Then. "You're quick. I'm cold and I'm angry, and I've had 4 hours of sleep in 2 days. Imagine me rested." And he almost smiled. "I have 30 riders a mile down the pass," he said. "They come up at dawn. I'll ride into Blackmore with a full vanguard and a banner, and Marchetti will bow, so low he'll get gravel in his teeth. And you'll see nothing." "Explain that." "Because you'll be the king." Nell's hands were moving now. She hadn't given them permission. "The second you walk in, every door in that fortress locks. Every ledger goes in a drawer. Every man with something to hide goes, and stands somewhere very innocent, and smiles at you for 3 days. You'll get a feast, and a bow, and absolutely nothing else, and then you'll ride home, and 6 months later something will happen on your southern border, and you'll wonder how you missed it." She stopped. Her chest was going. Rurik hadn't moved. "Go on," he said. And Nell Ashgrove, standing in the snow, 26 years old, discarded, starving, holding the golden crest of the Alpha King in a hand, with pine tar under the nails, made him an offer. "I lived in that fortress for 3 years. Quiet. I know every door. I know the 2 that don't lock. I know the tunnel under the east wall that the old Alpha had dug and never told the council about, because I was there when his son found the plans and laughed about it. I know which of his men drinks. I know which one owes money to a man in the river country. I know the smell of that place at 3 in the morning, and I know what it's supposed to smell like, which means I'll know if it smells like something else." She took a breath. "You want to know what Aldrich's hiding? You can't find out." "I can." Rurik's voice, very low. "And what do you want?" "Take me in the front door." She held the medallion out to him. "On your arm. In your colors. Not as a spy in the kitchens, as the most looked-at woman in that courtyard. Because that's the trick, isn't it? Nobody searches the thing everyone's staring at." Silence. "And while every single wolf in Blackmore is busy having the worst day of their lives trying to figure out what I'm doing there." She let it sit. "Nobody's watching where I go at night." The fire cracked. Rurik Vance did not take the medallion. He said, "You're bargaining with a king like a merchant." And Nell said, "I'm bargaining with a man who's hungry for information. You're the one who's starving here. Your Majesty." He laughed. Out loud. Once. A rough bark of a thing that went up into the rocks and came back. What do you get out of it, he said. Be honest. If you lie to me now I'll put you on a horse and send you west and you'll never see me again. Nell thought about lying. She thought about it for about a quarter of a second. He told 40 people I was worthless, she said. Flat. And I believed him. That's the actual part. Not the bond, not the scar. I stood in a hall and heard a man list everything wrong with me and I thought, well, he'd know. Her voice did something on the last word. She let it. So I went out to the fringe and I built a woman who looked exactly like his argument. 6 months. Hollow. Filthy. Talking to nobody. And this morning I looked in a mirror and I understood that I have been doing his work for him. She looked up. I want to walk into that hall and be the piece of evidence that he was wrong. In front of every alpha he invited. I don't need to hurt him. I need him to look at me and understand that his judgment is garbage, and I need a room full of people to watch him understand it. Beat. You get your information. I get my correction. Rurik Vance stood in the firelight and looked at her for a long time. You understand what I'd be doing, he said. If I walk into a wedding with the bride's predecessor on my arm. Yes. It's cruel. Yes. It's a knife in a man's ribs in front of his allies, and it's not even my knife, I'm just holding the door. Yes. Say it out loud. What I'd be doing. And Nell said. You'd be telling the world that what Aldrich Marchetti threw in the ditch, the crown picked up and put in silk. You'd be telling 12 allied alphas that his judgment is so bad he can't tell a weapon from garbage. And every one of them is going to go home and look at their treaty with Blackmore and think, huh. She hadn't meant to use that word. It came out anyway. It went through her like a splinter. Rurik was quiet. Then he said, I'm using you. Yes. I'm using you to destabilize a rival and gather intelligence in a hostile fortress, and if it goes badly you'll be a half-blood woman alone in a building full of people who hate you, and there's a real chance you don't come out. Yes. I'm not going to dress it up for you. I'm not going to tell you it's a fairy tale. It's a transaction. And Nell Ashgrove said. Good. And she meant it, and he heard that she meant it, and that, more than the mountain, more than the math, more than the boldness, is the thing that decided it. Because Rurik Vance had spent 12 years surrounded by people who wanted to be told a nicer version. And here was one who didn't. Look at me, though, she said. The adrenaline was going out of her, and the doubt was coming in behind it like tide. Look at me. I'm a feral half-blood in a dead man's boots. I don't know how to walk in a court. I don't have a dress. I don't have jewels. I don't have manners. Aldrich's going to take one look and laugh. A dress can be tailored. Rurik reached out. He didn't touch her face. He wasn't familiar. He put one large warm hand on her shoulder, and the grip was firm and completely, entirely impersonal, and it was the first time anyone had touched her in 6 months. Jewels can be bought. Dirt washes off. His amber eyes locked on. But the woman who just looked a king in the eye and told him he was the one starving that can't be bought. That's the part one need. The rest is shopping. He stepped back. Gave her air. 10 days to the ceremony. 8 now. My winter estate is a day's ride from here. We have tailors. We have a woman named Odile Rask who has terrified 4 generations of nobility, and will do the same to you, and you'll be better for it. He nodded at the trail behind her. Or you walk down that mountain, disappear into the snow, and he's right forever. Nell looked back at the path she'd carved. 2 days of it. Going down and away into the dark. She thought about the cabin. The cold hearth. The 4 winters of firewood she'd never burn. She thought about the red wax and the sharp slanted handwriting. Your presence is required. It is time you accepted your place. And she looked at the king of the north. And her heart started beating a slow steady drum, and her jaw set, and something behind her collarbone, that had been throbbing for 6 months went suddenly, mercifully quiet. I'll need a very expensive dress, Nell said. Rurik's mouth curved. Sharp. Dangerous. You'll have the finest in the kingdom. He turned to the dark and raised his voice, and it was a different voice entirely, and out of the black rocks below the clearing there was immediately the sound of men moving, which meant they had been there the whole time, which meant she had been surrounded for an hour, and hadn't known. Saddle the horses. We ride for the winter estate. Dawn broke over the high ridge, and painted the snow pink and violent orange. Nell stood at the edge of the overhang looking down, into the valley. Behind her, armor. 12 elite lichen guards in dark iron and fur, kneeling in the snow in front of their king. The whole campsite turned into a royal pavilion in about 4 minutes. Rurik came up beside her. He'd shed the leather. Underneath, dark heavy silk. A fur mantle clasped with silver wolves. The traveler was gone. The monarch was standing there instead, and it was, frankly, unsettling. You're quiet, he said. I shared a rabbit with the king. I yelled at him. I didn't curtsy. Deadpan. I'm trying to decide if I get executed before or after breakfast. He let out a short real laugh. I liked the yelling. It was honest. Which is more than I'll get in Blackmore. Nell turned to look at him. You didn't answer me last night. What do you actually think he's doing? Rurik's face changed. The amusement went out of it like a light going off. I have a suspicion, he said. I don't have a fact. And a king who moves on a suspicion is a king who starts a war he can't explain afterward. He looked out over the valley. His father was loyal for 30 years. Aldrich's been in the chair 3, and he's spent all 3 trying to look like a man who deserves it. And there's been movement on that border that doesn't match the trade figures. Horses bought that nobody's riding. Iron going south that isn't coming back as tools. The wind came up the pass. And 6 months ago he tore the bond out of a woman in front of 40 witnesses, for reasons that make no political sense at all. Nell went cold. What? Think about it. He didn't look at her. You were already in place. Already invisible. Already, forgive me, unimportant. A half-blood mate is not an obstacle to a political marriage. Alphas keep both. It's ugly, but it's common. Nobody in the north would have blinked. He turned his head. He didn't have to do it publicly. He didn't have to do it at all. Silence. So why did he, Rurik said. And Nell Ashgrove stood on a mountain at dawn, with the sun coming up on her ruined boots, and felt something move under her feet, some enormous piece of the world, sliding, that she had thought was bedrock. I don't know, she whispered. Rurik turned back to the valley. That's why I need you inside. The winter estate was a fortress, not a palace. Dark granite. Heavy timber. Nestled in a high valley, and built by somebody who'd expected to be attacked. It smelled like beeswax, and wood smoke and 400 years of money that had never once been spent on anything decorative. The water in the copper tub was scalding. Nell didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, while 2 stone-faced maids scrubbed 6 months off her arms. The water went brown, then black. Mountain grime. Pine sap. Dried blood she didn't remember getting. Odile Rask directed the operation. 60 years old. Iron gray. Built like a fence post. She didn't offer one single pitying glance, didn't cluck, didn't murmur "Oh you poor thing." She looked at Nell the way a blacksmith looks at a bar of rough iron. Something to be heeded. Hammered. Shaped. Her hands are ruined, one of the maids murmured, going at Nell's palm with a pumice stone. Leave them. Odil's voice could have cracked stone. The king did not ask for a porcelain doll. He asked for a weapon. She handed Nell a towel as she rose from the tub. Calluses prove she survived. 3 days. That's what they had. 3 days, and they used every hour of them. The gown was not ethereal. It didn't float. Rurik had understood the assignment. The thing they built was structural. Midnight blue velvet, so dark it swallowed the firelight and gave nothing back. A bodice boned, with whalebone, stiff enough to force the spine into a line. Long tight sleeves. Silver thread at the cuffs, subtle, catching the light like the edge of something. She didn't look like a flower. She looked like a sky about 10 minutes, before it does something terrible. Odile fastened a heavy silver choker around her throat. It sat high. It covered the scar completely. The cold metal against her skin was harsh and, unexpectedly, an anchor. Breathe, Odile instructed, pulling the laces. I can't. You will learn. Weak wolves pant. Royal companions breathe from the diaphragm. They drilled her. How to enter a room. How to sit, you don't sit, you arrive at a chair. How to hold a knife at a table, so it doesn't look like you know how to hold a knife. How to speak. Softly, Odile said, for the 9th time. You do not raise your voice. Ever. Not once. Why not? Because a woman, who raises her voice is asking to be heard. Odile pulled a lace tight enough, that Nell's vision spotted. A woman who lowers it is making them listen. Let them lean in. Let them work for it. On the 2nd day Nell got it right. She said a sentence she didn't even remember what, in a voice like a knife going through silk, and every maid in the room stopped moving. Odile Rask looked at her for a long moment. And then she said, "Ah." And Nell felt the floor tilt. Because that was it. That was the sound. Different mouth, different word, same exact note. Ha. Ah. The sound of somebody being surprised into agreeing with her. She hadn't heard it in 3 years. She'd forgotten she used to make people make that noise. The oak door opened on the 3rd evening. Rurik stepped in. He'd shed the travel gear too. High-collared tunic, charcoal wool, silver clasps down that enormous chest. A cloak of black bear fur. He radiated a quiet, suffocating authority that made the maids find urgent business elsewhere. He stopped a few feet from her. His amber eyes went over the whole thing. Slow. Assessing. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a compliment. Does it fit? It's heavy, Nell said. And I can't bend at the waist. Good. You won't be bowing to anyone. He came closer. Ozone and cold iron. Marchetti will look for weakness. He'll be looking for the feral girl he threw out. If you fidget, you lose. If you look at the floor, you lose. Don't speak unless spoken to. And when you speak. Softly, Nell said. I know. Odile has explained it 40 times, and once with a hairbrush. The corner of his mouth moved. Then she said, before she could stop herself. What if I freeze? It came out small. What if I see him and I just break? Rurik took her by both shoulders and turned her to face him. The grip was completely impersonal and fiercely, absolutely supportive. You will not break. Flat certainty. Because you're not alone in that hall. You're walking in under my crest. If he insults you, he insults the crown. If he touches you, it's an act of war. You have the entire Northern Army standing behind you, Nell. A beat. Let him see that. He reached into his pocket. A heavy silver signet ring. The same crowned wolf. He took her right hand, the ruined one, the split-knuckled one, the one Odile had refused to fix, and slid the ring onto her index finger. Cold. Heavy. Real. You're not Nell of the Fringes anymore, he said. He stepped back. You're the honored companion of the king. He went to the door. Stopped. Now let's go ruin a wedding. 2 days by carriage. It was not a quiet trip. Rurik's procession was designed to be seen. 30 armored lichen riders flanking an iron-reinforced carriage the size of a cottage. Banners snapping in the wind. The ground shaking under the synchronized thud of warhorses that had never once been asked to hurry. When they crossed into Blackmoor territory, the air changed. Pine. Iron. Home. Nell's stomach tied itself into a knot she could feel from the inside. She knew these roads. She'd hunted these woods. She'd bled on this dirt. She had, specifically, right there, on that curve, age 22, chasing an elk and going over a rock. She sat very straight on the velvet bench and looked at all of it and did not say one word for 9 miles. The main road to the fortress was lined with pack. They'd come out to watch the Allied Alphas arrive. Expecting finery. Expecting a parade. What they got was a military occupation. Rurik's riders parted the crowd with a ruthlessness that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with never once slowing down. The pack members felt the king's aura hit them and folded, heads down, throats bared, an entire village going to its knees in the slush as the black carriage rolled through. And Nell sat inside it. And she could smell them. The baker. The blacksmith. 2 warriors she'd sparred with, who'd knocked her down and helped her up, and once carried her home drunk on her 23rd birthday. And they could smell her. She watched it go through the crowd like a crack through ice. Noses twitching. Heads coming up. Eyes going wide. Because they caught the scent of the discarded mate, the one who was supposed to be rotting in a shack 40 miles east, and it was wrapped, saturated, drowned in the overwhelming ozone and iron scent of the Alpha King. It broke their minds. The whispers started behind the carriage and ran alongside it and got to the fortress gates before she did. The iron gates groaned open. The courtyard was packed. Alphas from a dozen allied packs in their best furs, drinking spiced wine, laughing. And at the top of the grand stone stairs, Aldrich Marchetti. 30 years old. Broad. Handsome in that rugged, arrogant way that works on 19-year-olds and stops working around 24. Crimson wool coat. Heavy gold chain across his chest. Beside him, autoline vein. 24. Objectively, irritatingly beautiful. Tall. Gold hair. Silk that had been cut by somebody who understood exactly what they were doing. They looked like the future. The carriage stopped. The courtyard went dead silent. Every eye on that black door. A guard stepped forward and pulled it open. Rurik got out first. He didn't look around. He didn't acknowledge the gasps or the frantic bowing rippling out from the carriage like a stone dropped in a pond. He simply turned. Reached back in. And offered his hand. Nell took one shallow breath, diaphragm, against the whalebone, the way Odile had beaten into her, and put her gloved hand in his. And she stepped out. The silence shattered. Not into noise. Into a sound she'd never heard before and would never forget, the collective inward gasp of 200 wolves. Down at the bottom of the stairs, Bram Coyle dropped his goblet. It hit the cobblestones and rang like a bell, and red wine went across the snow in a long arterial spray, and nobody moved to clean it up, because nobody in that courtyard could move at all. Nell didn't look at Bram. She didn't look at the whispering alphas. She fixed her eyes on the top of the stairs. And she watched the color leave Aldrich Marchetti's face. All of it. Everything. He went the color of the snow. His jaw came loose. His eyes, those eyes that were always so sure, that had looked at 40 people and said, "Weak wolf, no blood, cannot command respect." Those eyes went wide, with something she had absolutely never seen in them before. Panic. He looked at the velvet. He looked at the silver at her throat, covering the mark he'd carved there. He looked at the ring on her finger. And beside him, Adeline Vane's perfect smile did something interesting. It didn't fall. It paused. It stopped, mid-expression, like a woman reading a sentence twice. And her eyes went, not to Nell. To Aldrich. And then past him. And then down the steps. Nell followed it. For 1/2 second, she followed the bride's glance down, and to the left. And that's when she saw him. Standing 1 step behind, and to the side of the Alpha of Blackmore. Hands folded. Sable-lined cloak. Perfectly, absolutely calm, the only wolf in that entire courtyard, whose face had not moved 1 single millimeter. Bram Coyle had dropped his goblet. But Bram Coyle wasn't surprised. And Nell Ashgrove, 26 years old, standing on the arm of the King of the North in a dress that cost more than her father's house, felt the world tilt for the second time in 5 days. Because she'd seen that stillness before. She'd seen it, from the floor of a stone hall, 6 months ago, right at the edge of her vision, right before everything went white. Off to the left. In the shadows. Where somebody had nodded. Rurik tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. He didn't rush. He started up the stairs at a slow, deliberate pace that forced every single wolf in that courtyard to stand there and watch it happen. "Head up," he murmured. So low only she heard it. "You own this stone." Nell lifted her chin a fraction of an inch. Her heart was going like a war drum. Her face was cold polished marble. And underneath it, in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all, one thought was going around and around. It wasn't him. It was never him. Somebody nodded. "And I've been out in the woods for 6 months hating the wrong man." They stopped 2 steps below Aldrich and Adeline. Rurik was tall enough that he still looked down at the Alpha of Blackmore. Aldrich recovered. Give him that. He recovered with the speed of a man who'd been trained for exactly this, and he bowed, low, deep, a display of respect he visibly loathed giving. "My king. We are deeply honored. We didn't expect." His eyes flicked to Nell. And for 1 instant something raw and venomous broke through the front. Such a grand arrival. Alpha Marchetti. Rurik's tone was perfectly flat. No warmth at all. He might have been reading a bill of lading. "I received your invitation. I found the proposition of your union intriguing." He let that sit exactly 1 beat too long. "So I brought my honored companion. To witness the spectacle." He gestured, slightly, at Nell. Aldrich's jaw clenched, so hard she genuinely thought she might hear something crack. He was trapped. He could not insult the king's companion. He could not question her. He could not, so much as frown at her. "Welcome," he choked out, "Nell." And Nell Ashgrove looked at him. She did not smile. She did not offer the traditional greeting. She did not lower her eyes. She looked at him, with the exact same flat, tired expression she'd used on a tree stump 5 days ago. "Aldrich." Her voice went out across that silent courtyard like a blade through silk. Every single wolf leaned in. "Thank you for the invitation. Beat. It's entirely fitting that I witness you taking your place." His own words. Handed back. Aldrich Marchetti's eyes flared, with a rage so complete it had nowhere to go, and he could do absolutely nothing about any of it. Adeline stepped forward. Smooth. Fast. She looped her arm through her almost mate's, and her smile came back on like a lamp. "We are thrilled to host you both." Please, the feast is beginning. The high table awaits. Excellent, Rurik said. And he didn't wait to be led. He simply walked forward, straight ahead, forcing the Alpha of Blackmoor and the daughter of Ironvale to step aside in their own doorway, taking the path for himself and the woman on his arm. And as they passed, Nell caught Aldrich's scent. Pine. Iron. Expensive cologne. And underneath it, sharp, bitter, unmistakable fear. Good, she thought. But her eyes weren't on Aldrich. Her eyes had already moved. Down and to the left. To the man in the sable-lined cloak, standing perfectly still beside a puddle of spilled wine, watching her come up the stairs, with an expression of absolutely nothing at all. Somebody nodded, she thought. And Bram Coyle, 50 years old, Beta of Blackmoor, the man who'd taught her which berries were safe when she was 19. Looked back at her. And did not blink. The Great Hall of Blackmoor was built to make you feel small. That's not an accident. That's architecture. Ceiling 40 feet up, lost in smoke. Oak beams thick as a man's chest, black with 300 years of soot. For hearths going at once, each one big enough to roast an ox standing up. Banners hanging down the length of it, every pack Blackmoor had beaten, absorbed, or outlived, their crests turned sideways and hung upside down, which is a very old way of saying we won, and you didn't. Long tables down the stone floor. 200 wolves already seated. And at the far end, up on a wooden dais, the high table. 6 chairs. Built for Aldrich. His bride. Their families. The new unified power structure of the southern border, sitting in a row, where everybody could look at it and understand what had just been made. Nell walked in on the arm of the King of the North and watched Rurik Vance destroy that seating chart in about 4 seconds. Here's how it went. They came up the center aisle. 200 wolves stood. Nobody had told them to. They just did, the way water goes downhill. Rurik got to the dais. There was a chair waiting for him. Good chair. Carved. Placed with great care at Aldrich's right hand, the honored guest position, the one that says you are important, and I am the host. Rurik walked past it. Didn't look at it. Didn't acknowledge it existed. He went to the center of the table. To the big one. The one with the wolf's head on the backrest, and the arms worn smooth by 4 generations of Marchetti hands. The Alpha's chair. And he pulled it out. And he gestured for Nell to sit in it. The sound the hall made was not a gasp. It was quieter than that, and it was worse. It was 200 people simultaneously deciding not to breathe. Nell sat. She sat the way Odile had drilled into her. You don't lower yourself, you arrive. Spine against the whalebone. Chin level. Hands in her lap. She put her hands on the arms of the chair. The wood was warm. Somebody had been sitting in it recently. Don't think about that. Don't think about him sitting here at breakfast this morning, with no idea. Don't. Rurik took the seat at her immediate right. The one that was supposed to be the bride's. He sat down, arranged his cloak, and looked entirely at ease, like a man settling in at his own kitchen table. Aldrich Marchetti arrived at the dais 11 seconds later. And stopped dead. Nell watched his face go through it. She had 3 years of that face memorized, and she watched it go through every single stage in under 2 seconds. Confusion. Recognition. And then the red. Coming up the neck. Into the jaw. Dark, blotchy, dangerous red. My king, he said. Low. Very low. He was working hard to keep it off the floor of the hall. That seat is? Perfectly comfortable, Rurik said. Smooth. Not loud. He didn't even turn his head all the way. Thank you. He picked up a goblet. Unless you'd prefer I sit with the squires. By the doors. Silence. 200 wolves, watching their alpha get taken apart in his own hall, with a sentence about chairs. Aldrich's chest went up. And down. And up. And for one absolutely electric second Nell thought he was going to shift. Right there. Right on the dais. She saw it come, into his shoulders, the tension that means the wolf is about to come up, through the man like a fist through paper. Do it, she thought. Please. Do it. Because against a king? He'd be nothing. He'd be a boy who'd bitten a mountain. He didn't do it. Of course not, Aldrich said. My king. And he took the seat to Adeline's left. Which meant Adeline had to sit next to Rurik. Which meant the newly bonded rulers of the two largest packs on the southern border spent their own wedding feast pushed out to the edge of their own high table, like two children who'd arrived late. Nell picked up her knife. Small pieces. Precise. Chew and swallow before you look up. He's watching you eat. He's been watching you eat, since you sat down. Let him watch. The feast began and nobody celebrated. That's the thing about a room full of alphas. They're political animals. All of them. Every single one of those men in furs had spent 30 years learning to read a room, because in the North, misreading a room is how you end up, with your throat in somebody's mouth. They read this one in about 90 seconds. Servants scurried. Wine got poured. Silver platters of roast boar and venison hit the tables, with a clatter that sounded, in that silence, faintly hysterical. And the alphas ate very slowly, and watched the dais. Because there was a woman sitting in the Blackmore alpha's chair. And she wasn't the bride. Adeline Vane made her move somewhere between the second and third course. Nell had been waiting for it. She'd been counting the minutes, actually, because you don't get handed a gift like that at your own wedding and just swallow it. Not if you're any good. And Adeline Vane was good. Nell could see it. Everything about her was calibrated, the tilt of the head, the exact number of teeth in the smile, the way she leaned forward past Aldrich, with an expression of such perfectly manufactured warmth, that 4 people at the nearest table leaned in too. I must say, Nell. Her voice carried. Not loud. Carried. She'd been trained too. We were quite surprised when the king's riders came through the gate. We'd assumed you were still living out in the fringe woods. Beat. It must be such a shock to your system. Being in a hall like this again. The hall quieted. The nearest tables went first, then it spread, that ugly beautiful ripple, when a crowd realizes something is about to happen, and decides to stop chewing. 12 allied alphas leaned in. There it is, Nell thought. She's not attacking you. She's reminding them. She's putting the word feral back in the room, without saying it. That's good. That's actually very good. All right. Nell put her knife down. She didn't put it down hard. She set it on the linen, without a sound, which took more work than slamming it would have. She didn't blush. She didn't rush. She turned her head. Slowly. And she found Adeline Vane's eyes, and she held them. The fringe woods are quiet, Lady Adeline. Soft. So soft that the men at the far end of the table stopped talking, so they could hear. They teach you to tell a predator from a scavenger. She let it breathe. The transition to this hall has been quite seamless. The company's much the same. Somewhere down the left-hand table, an alpha coughed. He coughed the way men cough, when they have just laughed, and would very much like everyone to believe they didn't. Then another one. Then a third, an old boy, from the iron mines, 60-something, who didn't even bother with the cough, and just made a low HNH sound, into his cup. Adeline Vane's face went stiff. For half a second. That's all. Half a second of the mask not fitting. And Nell saw it and thought, got you. And then Autoline did something Nell was not expecting at all. She smiled. Not the calibrated one. A different one. Small but private, at the corner of the mouth, the smile of a person who has just been hit and found the experience informative. And she sat back. And she said nothing. What? What was that? She's supposed to, she should be. Why isn't she? Aldrich's goblet came down on the table. Hard. Wine went over the rim and across the white linen in a spreading red stain that nobody moved to blot. Watch your tone. He leaned forward. His aura came off him in a wave, that aggressive alpha pressure that makes the air feel like water, that presses on the back of your neck and tells your knees to fold. You may be wearing silk, Nell. But do not forget who you're addressing. His voice dropped to a hiss. You're in my house. Rurik Vance did not say a word. He didn't growl. He didn't flare. He didn't stand up. He just stopped eating. He set his knife down. He turned his head. And he looked at Aldrich Marchetti. That's all he did. And the temperature in a 40-foot hall, with 4 hearths going, dropped like somebody had opened a door onto the mountain. Aldrich's aura hit that stare and died. It didn't fade. It sputtered the way a candle goes out when a big man walks past it fast. The Alpha of Blackmoor broke eye contact. He looked down at his plate. In his own hall. On his own wedding night. In front of 12 allied alphas and 200 of his own people, Aldrich Marchetti looked at his dinner, because a man 40 feet away had turned his head. Nobody breathed. And into that silence, Nell said. Alpha Marchetti is right. Rurik's eyebrow went up. Aldrich's head came up too fast, surprised, suspicious, the face of a man who's been kicked so many times in 10 minutes, that a hand extended looks like a wind-up. I am in your house, Nell said. Quiet. Even. She let her hand rise to the silver at her throat and rest there, and every eye in that room followed it, and every eye in that room knew exactly what was underneath. The house where I was judged unworthy. Her fingers touched the metal. The house where I was told by you, in front of the council, in a voice that carried very well, that a small wolf and a thin bloodline made me useless. She lowered her hand. And she let the signet ring catch the firelight. It sat on her split, calloused, ruined index finger, and it threw the hearth light back across the high table, and the crowned wolf's head flashed once. But I find something fascinating, Aldrich. She leaned forward. Just slightly. Just enough. You needed a political marriage to secure your borders. To make your name mean something. It took you, what? 4 months of negotiation? 5. Riders back and forth to Ironvale all autumn. Concessions on the timber road. A dowry that I understand made your treasurer weep. Somebody down the table made a noise. 5 months. To borrow power from another pack. She let the silence stretch. 1 heartbeat. 2. It took me 1 conversation. The hall did not make a sound. Tell me, Alpha. Softer still. Who's the weak wolf now? 50 feet away, at the far end of that enormous room, a log shifted in the hearth, and everybody heard it. Aldrich Marchetti's face was ash. He had nothing. There was nothing to say. There was no answer to it. He had built his entire reign on being the man who made the smart choice, and a woman in a borrowed dress had just held it up to the light in front of every ally he had, and it was empty. Nell picked up her goblet. She took her first sip of wine all evening. It tasted like the best thing she'd ever had in her life, and that included the venison, and she'd been starving. Later, she'd try to describe that hour to somebody and fail. Because nothing else happened. There was no fight. Nobody drew. Nobody shifted. The musicians kept playing, and the wine kept coming, and by any honest accounting it was a perfectly ordinary wedding feast. Except the conversations changed. She watched it. She watched it happen in real time, and it was the most extraordinary thing she'd ever seen. A territorial lord, from the eastern crags, big man, scarred face, hadn't said 6 words all night, leaned forward, and asked Rurik about the snowpack in the high passes. Not Aldrich. The host of the feast was sitting right there. And this man leaned past him to ask the king about weather. 10 minutes later, an alpha from the Iron Country raised his cup. At Nell. Just a small lift. 2 inches. No toast, no words. He caught her eye across the hall, and raised his cup 2 inches and drank. She didn't nod back. Odile had been very clear on this. You do not thank them. You receive. She let her eyes rest on him for exactly 1 second, and then moved on, and the old man in the Iron Country furs sat back looking, for reasons Nell couldn't have explained, deeply satisfied. They were pivoting. 12 alphas, in 1 hour, quietly rotating in their seats away from the man who'd invited them. Because they'd come here to watch Aldrich Marchetti become somebody. And instead they'd watched him get taken apart by a half-blood woman, with no army, no pack, and no title, while he sat there and did nothing, because he was terrified of the man sitting quietly beside the executioner. That's not a wedding. That's an audit. Autoline tried. Give her credit, she tried. She sent for more wine. She had the musicians play louder, the cellos came up and started sawing away at something that was supposed to be joyful and mostly sounded like an argument. She laughed twice, brightly, at nothing. It didn't work. Because you cannot laugh your way out of a room that has already decided. She was a beautiful bride sitting next to a neutered wolf, and every single person in that hall could see it, and there was nothing she could do about any of it. Nell watched her stop trying. That was the interesting part. Somewhere in the 4th course Autoline vein simply stopped. Set down her cup. Folded her hands. Went completely still, with a small pleasant expression on her face. And didn't move again for 20 minutes. She's not upset, Nell thought. What is she doing? She's waiting. For what? Through all of it, Nell sat still. Her back was screaming. The whalebone had gone from uncomfortable to actively cruel somewhere around the 2nd hour, and she had a cramp in her left thigh with its own opinions. She kept her chin up. She kept her hands loose in her lap. And beside her, Rurik Vance simply occupied space. He didn't gloat. That was the thing that got her. He didn't lean over and murmur something clever. He didn't look at Aldrich once, after that one look. He just sat there. Enormous. Warm. Radiating a calm, so total that it dismantled the man 40 feet away, without ever acknowledging him. He doesn't fight people, Nell thought. He just exists at them, until they fall over. When the last course was cleared, heavy spiced pastries, that nobody ate, Rurik stood. The hall went silent again. Instantly. Like a hand on a string. Alpha Marchetti. His voice went up, into the timber, and came back down. Your hospitality is noted. We'll retire. See that my guards are quartered warmly. He didn't wait for a reply. He offered his arm. Nell rose, smooth, effortless, ignoring the vicious spasm in her thigh, and took it. They walked down the center aisle of the Great Hall of Blackmore, and 200 wolves parted for them. Heads down. Eyes averted. Silent. She had walked this aisle 100 times. She had walked it carrying laundry. She had walked it drunk. She had walked it once, with a broken wrist, at 19, brand new and terrified, on the arm of a boy who thought she was funny. She had crawled off the end of it, 6 months ago, on her hands and knees. She walked out of it now like she owned the stone. The oak doors shut behind them. And Nell stopped. She let go of his arm and put her back against the cold granite of the corridor wall, and the adrenaline, which had been burning hot and clean and beautiful for 2 hours, went out from under her like a floor collapsing. Her knees buckled. Her hands started shaking. Violently. Uncontrollably. Both of them. Stop it. Stop it. Somebody could walk out here. Stop. Rurik didn't crowd her. He took a step back. Gave her air. That was the thing she'd remember. He reached into the bare fur and came out with a flat silver flask. Unscrewed it. Held it out. Nell took it with both hands because one wasn't going to work. She drank. It wasn't wine. It was high-proof mountain whiskey, and it tasted like peat and house fires, and it went down her throat like a lit match, and hit her stomach, and bloomed, and for the first time all night she was warm. She coughed. Handed it back. Thank you. You're shaking. It's the cold. It's the crash. He took a swig himself. Capped it. Violence takes a toll on the body. And what you just did in there was pure unadulterated violence. Nell let out a breath that was half laugh and half something else, and she pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, and did not care what it did to Odil's 3 days of work. He looked small. It came out wrecked. 6 months I've been out there thinking he was a monster. This immovable thing that crushed me. And I look at him tonight, and he's just desperate. Desperate. Tyrants usually are. He put the flask away. And he didn't explain it to her. He didn't tell her what it meant. He just stood in a stone corridor with a woman who was shaking and let her finish shaking. Then he walked her to her door. Short respectful nod, and he was gone down the corridor toward his own quarters, boots making no sound on stone, which Nell thought was a genuinely alarming thing for a man that size to be able to do. 2 royal guards took position outside her door. She went in. The room was grand. Bigger than her entire cabin. Fire already built and roaring. A bed you could have lost a horse in. She stripped the velvet off and dropped it over a chair. Unclasped the choker. Set it on the vanity. And looked in the glass. There it was. The scar. Visible again. Pale and jagged at the base of her throat. She touched it. And for the first time in 6 months, it didn't throb. The ache was just gone. The way a noise you've lived with so long you stopped hearing it is gone, and you only notice when it stops. She stood there, with 2 fingers on her own throat. And somebody knocked on the door. Nell went still. Guards would announce. Guards would say Your Majesty, or My Lady or something. That's not a guard's knock. That's a 3 knocks. Light. Fast. That's a knock from somebody who doesn't want to be heard knocking. She grabbed her robe. Opened the door. Adeline Vane was standing in the corridor in a nightgown and a fur wrap and no shoes. And behind her, both of Rurik's royal guards were standing exactly where they'd been standing, faces forward, doing an extremely good impression of 2 men who had not seen anything. Well, Nell said. May I come in? No. All right, Adeline said, and came in. She walked past Nell, into the room like she'd been invited, which, technically, she had been raised in a fortress, and probably could not conceive of a door she wasn't allowed through. She found the wine on the sideboard. Poured 2 cups. Sat down in the chair by the fire, tucked her bare feet up under her, and drank one of them. Nell stood by the open door, with her hand still on it. What? What is this? Is she going to? No, she's not going to attack me. She's 24 and made of bird bones, and there are 2 royal guards in the... Then what? Nell shut the door. You're barefoot in a stone corridor in December, she said. Boots make noise. Adeline held out the second cup. Nell didn't take it. My father sold me for a timber road. That's how she opened. No preamble. She said it to the fire, not to Nell. 40 miles of it. From the Iron Vale border to the Eastern Crossing. That was the price. My father got 40 miles of road, and Aldrich got a bloodline, and I got a wedding. She drank. I found out in March. I met him in June. We've had 11 conversations. I counted. Nell said nothing. He doesn't love me, Adeline said. He doesn't dislike me either. He looks at me the way you look at a good horse you paid too much for. He's pleased. She finally turned her head. He didn't love you more than he loves me, if that's what you're wondering. He isn't capable. He is very charming and completely hollow, and I understood that in about 90 minutes, and it took you 3 years, which is not an insult, it's just that you were 19, and I was raised by wolves who negotiate. Okay, Nell thought. Okay. All right. You're not upset, Nell said. About what? About tonight. About the chair. About, she gestured at the entire universe. Everything. Oh, I'm furious, Adeline said. Pleasantly. That was the single most humiliating night of my life, and I'll be hearing about it, until I'm 80. My cousins are going to make songs. You have permanently damaged me in the eyes of everyone I've ever met. She drank again. It was also the best thing that's happened to me in a year. Nell's mouth opened. Closed. What? Do you know what I did, Adeline said, for 6 months? She set the cup down. I watched you. The room went cold. I sent a man. Twice a month. He'd ride out to the fringe and sit in a tree for 2 days, and come back and tell me what you did. Nell's hand went to the vanity. To the choker. Not to put it on. Just a thing to touch. Why? Because, Adeline said, you're the only person who ever got out of Aldrich Marchetti alive. Silence. Just the fire. Do you understand? He tore your bond out in front of 40 people and put you in a shack, and everyone in the north said, poor thing, she'll be dead by winter. And you weren't. She leaned forward. You chopped wood. Every day. My man had a chart. You put up 4 winters of firewood, Nell. You built a stack so high it blocked your own window. You talked to nobody, and you ate almost nothing, and you did not die, and I sat in Iron Vale getting fitted for a wedding dress, reading reports about a woman who was too stubborn to freeze. She sat back. You were the only good news I had. Nell did not sit down. She wanted to. Her legs wanted to. She did not, because sitting down is a decision, and she wasn't done deciding. You mocked me, she said. An hour ago. In front of the whole hall. Of course I did. Why? Because if I hadn't, my father's men would have asked why. Adeline's voice went flat and hard, and it was, suddenly, a completely different voice. There are 9 Iron Vale wolves in that hall, and every one of them reports to him. If the discarded mate walks in on the arm of the king, and the bride says nothing, that's a message. That travels. That gets back to my father, before the wine's finished, and then he's asking questions about me, and I cannot afford questions about me right now. She looked at Nell. I had to swing at you. So I swung at you badly. On purpose. She. No. She what? Living in the fringe woods. A shock to your system. That's not a. That's a nothing. That's an opening. That's a slow one right over the plate. She teed it up. She teed it up for me. You, Nell's voice came out strange. That was on purpose? You did it better than I hoped, Adeline said. The scavenger line was very good. I'd have gone with something shorter, but that's taste. Nell sat down. Fine. Fine, she sat down. She took the second cup off the table and drank the whole thing. All right, she said. Talk. Adeline Vane pulled a folded paper out of the fur wrap. She didn't hand it over. She set it on the table between them and put 2 fingers on it and looked at Nell over the top of it. Before I show you this, you need to understand something. If I'm wrong, I've just made a fool of myself in a stone room. If I'm right, and anyone finds out I gave it to you, I'll be dead before the ceremony. She slid it across. So. Your choice. Nell picked it up. Unfolded it. It was a guest list. The bonding of Alpha Aldrich Marchetti and Lady Adeline Vane. Confirmed attendance. 4 columns. Neat scribble hand. Pack name, Alpha's name, number in party, quartering assignment. Nell scanned it. Eastern Crags. Iron Country. River Lords. The whole southern shelf. 12 packs, all present, all accounted for, all currently downstairs drinking Aldrich's wine, and quietly deciding they didn't like him anymore. I don't. Not who's on it, Adeline said. Who isn't? Nell looked again. And this time she didn't read. She counted. 12 packs. 12. But the southern shelf isn't 12 packs. The southern shelf is. Wait. Wait, where's? Carstallo, Nell said. Where's Carstallo? They're 40 miles from here. They're Alpha and Aldrich's father hunted together for 20 years, that's Aldrich went to, that man's funeral, where's? She flipped the page over. Nothing on the back. And Greywater. Greywater's not here. And her hand was starting to shake again, and this time it wasn't the cold, and it wasn't the crash. The Fenmark packs. All 3 of them. That's the whole western line, that's. She looked up. That's 6,000 wolves. Closer to 8, Adeline said. Why aren't they on the list? That's the interesting question, isn't it? Nell put the paper down. Very carefully. Like it might go off. They declined, she said. That's all. It's winter, it's a long ride, they sent regrets. No. You don't know that. I do, actually. Adeline picked up her cup and found it empty and set it back down. Because I write the invitations. Beat. Or rather. I should have. That's the bride's job. It's traditional and it's tedious, and it took me 4 days, and I sat in a room in Iron Vale in October, with a scribe, and a list of every pack on the southern and western shelf, and I did it properly, and I sent it here for the Alpha's seal. She nodded at the paper. That is not my list. The fire cracked. Mine had 19 packs on it. Nell heard her own blood. That's a thing that happens. She'd read about it. She'd never had it happen. But she was sitting in a chair in a warm room, and she could hear her own blood going past her ears like water in a pipe. Somebody took 7 packs off the list. Somebody took 7 packs off the list. Between October and now. Between October and now. They weren't invited. They were never invited, Adeline said. They don't know there's a wedding. Or, they know, everyone knows, but no one asked them to come. Which for an Alpha is a very specific kind of insult, so they've all sat home being furious about it, which means not one of them has ridden out to ask why. She leaned forward. Nell. Every pack on that list is here. Inside these walls. Unarmed, because it's a ceremony, and you do not carry iron to a bonding. She let that sit. And every pack that isn't on that list is sitting at home. 40 miles away. Angry. Alone. And completely unaware. No. No, that's a coincidence. That's a scribal error. That's somebody's clerk being lazy in October, and nobody catching it. That happens all the 7 times? 7 packs? All of them contiguous? All of them on the same border? The whole western line. Somebody drew a line on a map. Nell stood up. She didn't decide to. She was just standing. I need to go look at something. It's the middle of the night. I know. There are guards on every. I know. Autoline Vane looked up at her, from the chair by the fire, and her face was calm and her hands, Nell noticed, were absolutely white where they gripped the arms. They won't see you, Autoline said. Will they? Nell stopped. What? Your wolf. It's small. I read the reports. Half-blood, minor scent signature. A very small pause. You can walk through a corridor, and a man will look right at the spot you're standing in, and not turn his head. Can't you? How do you know that? Because Aldrich told me, Autoline said. In one of our 11 conversations. He was explaining why he'd rejected you. He listed your inadequacies. It was quite thorough. He was very proud of the reasoning. She stood up. Barefoot. Wrapped the fur tighter. And she went to the door. She stopped with her hand on it. He said you were so small you didn't even register. That you'd walk into a room and no one would notice. She looked back over her shoulder. He said it like it was a flaw. She set her cup down on the sideboard. And she left. Nell Ashgrove stood alone in a grand guest chamber in Blackmore Fortress at 1 a.m, with a doctored guest list in her hand. And she started, very quietly, to laugh. He said it like it was a flaw. He said it like it was a flaw. Oh. Oh, you absolute. You made a list of everything wrong with me. You stood in front of 40 people, and you read it out. You said, her wolf is small. You said, she has no presence. You said, she walks into a room and no one notices. She stopped laughing. She looked at the choker on the vanity. Left it there. Aldrich. You didn't list my weaknesses. You handed me an inventory. She went out the window. Because the door had guards, and the guards were Ruriks, and Rurik's guards were loyal, but Nell had grown up in a village, where everybody was loyal, and everybody talked, and she'd learned young, that the difference between loyalty and silence is about 2 cups of wine. 2nd floor. Ivy on the granite. She'd done it at 21, drunk, in a rainstorm, coming back from a thing she'd never told Aldrich about. The stone remembered her hands. She dropped into the kitchen garden, and crouched in the dead rosemary, and waited 90 seconds, and nobody came. Nobody came. Because there's nothing to come for. Because you're a smell like wood smoke on somebody else's coat. Because you're a shape in the corner of the eye, that the eye decides is a shadow. Because you're small. She'd hated it her whole life. She'd hated it at 15, when she couldn't hold a shift longer than a minute. At 19 when the pack warriors were kind to her that way that's worse than cruelty. At 23 when Aldrich's council started using the word dainty, and meaning something else. She moved along the wall. And for the first time in 26 years, Nell Ashgrove was grateful for the thing that was wrong with her. The stable was first. Because horses are the easiest lie to catch. Men lie. Ledgers lie. Horses stand in a box and eat and there's no arguing with them. She went in, through the muck door at the back, the one that doesn't latch, the one that hadn't latched in 3 years, and she stood in the warm dark and breathed in hay and manure and animal and counted. 12 packs, downstairs. A visiting alpha travels with, call it 8. 10 if he's showing off. So, 120 horses. 150, generous. Plus Blackmore's own. Say another 60. 210. Nell walked the line. She walked it slow, hand on the stall doors, counting under her breath, and somewhere around the fourth aisle her stomach started to go wrong. She got to the end. She turned around. She walked it again, from the other side, because she'd made a mistake. She'd obviously made a mistake. She was tired, and cold, and drunk on half a cup of wine. She hadn't made a mistake. 640. 640 horses. And they weren't wedding horses. That was the thing that put the ice in her. Because a lord's horse is a statement. It's tall and it's glossy, and it's got a temperament like a spoiled child, and it cost more than a house. Half the animals in that stable were 15 hands of ugly, thick-necked, flat-footed, absolutely bomb-proof nothing. War horses. You don't buy 600 war horses for a wedding. You buy 600 war horses for a ride. Okay. Okay. Stop. Breathe. Think. He's an alpha with a new alliance. He's expanding. He bought horses because he's got money for the first time, and men buy stupid things when they get money. 600? Where are the men to ride them? Where are the... She stood in the dark stable, with her hand on a stall door, and she did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic did not work, and then she did it again, with a different assumption, and it worked perfectly, and she wished it hadn't. The men aren't here yet. The men are coming. The Undercroft. Under the North Storehouse. Down a stair that Aldrich's grandfather had cut, and Aldrich's father had bricked over, and Aldrich had reopened in his first year, which Nell knew, because she'd been there, because he'd shown her, because he'd been 27, and proud of it, and he'd wanted her to see. Look at this. My grandfather's. Nobody's been down here in 40 years. It smells like a grave, Aldrich. It smells like history. It smells like a grave that reads. He'd laughed so hard he'd dropped the lantern. Nell went down the stair. The door at the bottom was new. That was the first thing, and it took the bottom out of her, because the door at the bottom of a 40-year-old staircase was new oak, new iron, new hinges, and a lock that had been oiled within the month. It wasn't locked. Because who locks a door that nobody knows about? She pushed it open. She stood in the doorway for a long time. The lantern light went out ahead of her, and found the first row and stopped. Racks. Iron racks, floor to ceiling, going back into the dark further than her light would reach. Male shirts. Hanging in rows like carcasses in a butcher's cold room. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Oiled and hung and maintained, which meant somebody came down here and did this, which meant this wasn't a forgotten cache, this was inventory. Spears and barrels. Standing upright like wheat. Bows. Racked and unstrung, the way you store them when you intend to use them and not soon. And arrows. Nell walked down the aisle, and the arrows went on, and she stopped counting the bundles at 40, because at 40 the number stopped meaning anything. She stood in the middle of it, and turned around slowly. 800. This is 800 men. Blackmore has 340 warriors. I know that number. I know that number, because I used to sew their cloaks. This is 800. This is Blackmore, and it's not enough. This is Blackmore and Ironvale, and it's still not enough. This is... Who? Who else is coming? She got out. She got out, and she got up the stair, and she got across the kitchen garden, and she got up the ivy, and she got through her own window, and she sat on the floor of a grand guest chamber, with her back against the wall, and her hands over her mouth, and she did not make a sound for 4 minutes. Think. Think, come on. 800 sets of armor. 600 horses. 7 packs left off the guest list. The entire western line. 8,000 wolves who have no idea. 12 packs inside these walls. 12 packs inside these walls, who came for a wedding. 12 alphas who are going to stand in a courtyard tomorrow around a black stone, in ceremonial white, with no armor. Because that's the tradition. Because you come to the Moonstone Bear, that's the whole point, that's what it means. No armor, no iron, no guards, standing in a circle around a rock at dawn. Inside a fortress. With the gates. Nell stopped breathing. Oh. Oh, you clever, clever, clever. It's not a wedding. It's a room. It's a room, with a lock on it, and he spent 5 months, and 40 miles of timber road getting the right people to walk involuntarily. And blame the West. Blame the 7 who weren't invited. Karst Hollow, Greywater, Fenmark, they weren't at the wedding, were they? Funny, that. Almost like they knew. 12 dead alphas, and a story about who did it. And whoever's left standing rides west, with 600 horses to avenge them. And nobody in the north ever asks a single question about how a man, with 300 warriors came out of it owning the whole southern shelf. Her hands came off her mouth. Rurik. Rurik came. Rurik's inside these walls. Rurik has 30 riders, and they're all quartered in the outer bailey, because that's where you put visiting guards, that's protocol, that's... He walked in. He walked straight in. I walked him straight in. She hit his door, with the flat of her hand. The guards moved, actually reached, and she said wake him in a voice she didn't recognize, and one of them looked at her face, and did not argue. Rurik Vance opened the door in a shirt, and nothing else, and he was awake in under a second. Talk. Not out here. She talked for 6 minutes. She talked in the middle of his chamber, with her hair down, and her feet filthy, and her hands shaking, and she laid it out, the list, the 7 packs, the horses, the door with the new hinges, the 800 mail shirts hanging in the dark under the North storehouse like a butcher's shop. And the king of the North stood there. And went pale. She'd never seen a man that size go pale. It's a different thing on a big man. It's like watching a mountain get smaller. You didn't know, she said. Silence. You didn't know. No, Rurik said. And Nell felt something under her feet drop away. Because she'd assumed. Somewhere in the back of it, somewhere under the fear, she'd assumed he knew. That's what kings are. Kings know. He'd said horses bought, that nobody's riding on a mountain at dawn, and she'd assumed that was the tip of something, and he had the rest of it in a drawer somewhere. He didn't have the rest of it. He had a suspicion, and a deer, and a beat-up coat. I walked in, Rurik said. Very quietly. I walked in the front door, and sat at his table, and drank his wine. Yes. 30 riders. In the outer bailey. Behind a gate I don't control. Yes. He put one hand flat on the table. You saved my life. Not yet, Nell said. But I'm going to. And then he ruined it. He turned around, and he was moving, and his whole voice changed, and it was the voice, from the mountain, the one that had made her wolf whimper, and he said. Get dressed. We ride in 20 minutes. I want the horses saddled and the... No. Vanguard formed up in the outer bailey, and if that gate is closed we go through it. I've got 30 men, and they're the best in the... No. He stopped. He turned. And he looked at her, and there was, for about half a second, something on his face that no one had put there in 12 years. Excuse me? You run, Nell said, and you get away. Yes. That's the point. You get away, and 12 alphas die at dawn, and the West burns by spring, and you'll spend 4 years fighting a war you could have ended in one morning, and every one of those men downstairs, the one, from the crags, who asked you about the snowpack, the old boy, from the Iron Country, who raised his cup at me, every one of them dies in a courtyard tomorrow, while you're 40 miles north telling yourself you had no choice. Silence. You leave, you're not the king anymore. You're a man who was invited to a murder and left early. Rurik Vance did not move. You want to walk into a trap, he said. No. Nell's voice was very steady now. Her hands weren't shaking at all. She noticed that, from a distance, and found it interesting. I want to walk into a trap knowing where it is. She pointed at the floor. At the fortress under it. He built a room with a lock. Fine. Good. It's a beautiful piece of work, honestly, and I'd tell him so. But it only works if the right people are standing in the right places when the lock turns. She looked up at him. So we don't break the room. Beat. We just move everybody. Rurik stared at her for 11 seconds. She counted. Then he pulled out a chair. He sat down in it, this enormous man, in a shirt, at 2 in the morning, in a hostile fortress, and he put his hands flat on the table, and he said, Tell me. And Nell Ashgrove, 26 years old, half-blood, small wolf, no pack, no title, thrown out in front of 40 people for being useless. Started giving orders to the king of the north. They talked until 4. Here's what came out of it. 3 things. Nell counted them off on her ruined fingers. 1. Autoline. Ironvale had 9 men in the hall, and every one of them reported to her father, which meant Autoline Vane had 9 mouths pointed out of this fortress at a man, who did not want his daughter's wedding to become a massacre, because a massacre voids a timber road. She'd send a rider tonight. Karsthollow was 40 miles. Greywater 60. Fenmark, 90 and hard. They'd never make it by dawn. They don't have to, Nell said. They just have to arrive. 2. The tunnel. Under the east wall. Aldrich's grandfather cut it. It comes out in a culvert in the birch stand, half a mile out. It's not on any map, because his grandfather didn't trust maps. How do you know it's still open? Because I used it, Nell said, at 21, to sneak back and drunk. Twice. And because they didn't brick it, they put a door on it. The same year they put a door on the Undercroft. She looked at him. They're not hiding it from the world. They're hiding it from the pack. 12 of Rurik's men. In through a culvert, in the dark, before the ceremony. Inside the walls when the gates closed. And the rest, the other 18, the ones already quartered in the outer bailey, with 400 Blackmore warriors. They don't fight, Nell said. Then what do? They drink. Rurik's eyebrows went up. 400 Blackmore warriors are going to be on that wall in the morning, Nell said. With bows. And every single one of them has spent his whole life doing what Bram Coyle tells him to do, without asking why. She leaned in. So make them ask. Ask what? One question. Just one. Strange thing about the Western packs not being invited, eh? She spread her hands. Say it like the weather. Say it in the third cup. Don't argue. Don't recruit. Just put the question in the room and walk away. Silence. You can't buy an army in one night, Nell said. No. You don't have to. You just have to make 400 men wonder about something they hadn't thought to wonder about. 3. Nell was quiet for a moment on the third one. There's a problem, she said. Even if it all works. Even if we win the courtyard. Say it. We can't prove anything. She spread her hands. 800 mail shirts under a storehouse. So what? It's his storehouse. Every alpha in the north has a cache, you probably have 6. 600 horses? He's rich now. He bought horses. 7 packs off a guest list? She laughed, once, with nothing in it. That's a clerk. That's a lazy clerk in October. She leaned forward. You need the paperwork, Rurik. You need one thing, with his name on it in that room. Otherwise you're a king, who massacred an alpha at his own wedding, and then went looking for a reason. Rurik Vance said nothing for a long moment. Then, there won't be paperwork. He's not a fool. There's nothing down there, with his hand on it. No, Nell agreed. And she reached across the table and picked up her coat off the back of the chair, the traveling coat, the one from the estate, the one she'd worn over the mountains. And she put her hand in the pocket. And she pulled out a folded, creased, water-stained piece of vellum with a broken red seal. She set it on the table. Rurik looked at it. And then he looked at her. And the King of the North started, very slowly, to smile. She went down at 4:30. The Undercroft was exactly as she'd left it. Nell walked down the center aisle, with a lantern, past the mail shirts hanging like carcasses, past the barrels of spears, all the way to the back, where the arrows were stacked in bundles she hadn't been able to count. And she found a crate. Iron-bound. Lid off. Full of bowstrings, waxed and coiled. She knelt down. And she took the invitation out of her pocket. Your presence is required. It is time you accepted your place. Sharp handwriting. Slanting hard right. Written angry. Written by the Alpha of Blackmore, in his own hand, under his own seal, and carried 40 miles, through the snow by a woman who'd never once, in 6 months, been able to make herself burn it. I never knew why I kept you, she thought. She looked at it in the lantern light. Now I do. She slid it into the crate. Under the bowstrings. Not hidden. Just placed. Where a man searching would find it in the second minute, and not the first. His hand. His seal. Sitting in a crate in an illegal armory 40 feet under his own storehouse. You cannot argue with horses. You cannot argue with a guest list. You cannot argue with that. Nell stood up. She brushed off her knees. And she turned to go. She almost made it. She was 4 steps from the stair when the voice came out of the dark behind her. He never could write a letter. Nell did not scream. She was extremely proud of that, later. She did not scream, and she did not drop the lantern, and she did not run. She turned around. Bram Coyle was sitting on a barrel of spears. He'd been sitting there the entire time. He was 50 years old, and built like a barn door, and he was wearing the sable-lined cloak, and he had his hands folded in his lap, and he was looking at her, with an expression of enormous, weary patience. Every letter that man ever wrote, Bram said, he wrote angry. I told him. 20 times. Sleep on it, Aldrich. Write it in the morning. He shook his head. Never listened. Not about that. Nell's hand was on her knife. She hadn't put it there. How long have you been down here, she said. Since you came in the muck door. In the stable. In the stable. That was 3 hours ago. It was, Bram agreed. He didn't move. He didn't get up. He didn't reach for anything. He just sat on a barrel of spears in the dark under his own fortress, and looked at her the way a man looks at weather. You counted the horses twice, he said. That was good. Most men only count once. Run. Run right now. He's 50 and he's huge, and he's between you, and no, he's not between you, and the stair is right there, 4 steps, you could. Why isn't he moving? Why isn't he moving? You're not going to stop me, Nell said. No. Why not? Bram Coyle considered this. Because you'd get out, he said, or you wouldn't, and either way there'd be noise. And I've spent 20 years avoiding noise. He gestured at the crate. Also, I want to see how it goes. That was clever. The letter. I wouldn't have thought of that. Nell's grip on the knife tightened, until her hand hurt. You nodded, she said. Bram's head came up. In the hall. 6 months ago. I was on the floor, and I saw him look to the left, and I saw her voice cracked, and she hated it. I saw somebody in the shadows, and I thought I was dying, and I thought I'd imagined it. But I didn't. Did I? Silence. Did I? No, Bram Coyle said. You didn't imagine it. The lantern hissed. Nell heard her own heart. He didn't want to, she said. It came out very small. He was standing there, and he stopped. For 8 seconds. He didn't want to do it. He looked at you and you. I nodded. Why? Bram Coyle stood up. He did it slowly, the way big men his age stand up, one hand on the barrel, and he brushed his palms off, and he walked 4 steps, and stopped, and he was not threatening her, and that was somehow so much worse. You want to know why I had him take you out? Yes. You think you know? I know exactly, Nell said, and now her voice was shaking, and it wasn't fear. I know exactly. Because I'm a half-blood. Because my wolf's small. Because I made him look weak, and you needed him to look strong for the Iron Veil negotiation, and you couldn't have a dirt-blooded woman standing next to him, while you sold him to a man, with 4 centuries of. No. Nell stopped. That's what he thinks, Bram said. Beat. That's what he thinks, girl. That's the reason I gave him. It took me about a week to talk him into it, and I used every word you just said, and he believed every one, because he's 30, and he's frightened, and men like that will believe anything that sounds like strategy. He looked at her. And for the first time, Bram Coyle looked tired. You think I pulled you out because you were weak? He almost smiled. Nell. I pulled you out because you were the only person in this fortress who could stop me. What? What? No. No, that's not. I couldn't stop anything, I was nothing, I was. 20 years, Bram Coyle said. 20 years I've been building this. 3 alphas. I served his grandfather. I served his father. I've been waiting for the right one, not the strongest one, mind. The right one. The one who's hungry, and scared and wants very badly to be told he's a great man. He spread his hands. And I got him. Finally. Aldrich Marchetti. 30 years old, and hollow as a drum, and he'd have followed me straight off a cliff, if I told him it was a shortcut. He took a step forward. Except every time I put something in front of him. Every single time. For 3 years. His voice changed. He'd say, let me ask Nell. The Undercroft was very, very quiet. I told him to raise the timber levy in his first spring, Bram said. Because a levy makes crofters angry, and angry crofters make a border unstable, and an unstable border is how you justify buying horses. Step 1. Simple. He looked at her. He came back the next morning and said no. Nell couldn't breathe. The kitchen. The flour. His back against the cabinet. Huh. All right. I won't. I told him to push the Karst Hollow line in the 2nd year. Small thing. A grazing dispute. Enough to make Karst Hollow reach for iron first, so nobody'd ask questions later. He was going to. Bram Coyle's jaw worked. He asked you at dinner. I don't remember. No, Bram said. You wouldn't. That's the thing. You never knew you were doing it. You'd just say some flat, tired, obvious thing about how it was stupid, and he'd tilt his head, and he'd make that noise he makes. Huh. And 3 years of my life would go in the fire. Nell's back hit the rack. She hadn't moved. She'd have sworn she hadn't moved. But her back was against iron, and the mail shirts were shifting behind her, with a sound like rain on a roof. "You're lying," she said. "Why would I?" Because if you're not lying then. Because if you're not lying then 6 months. Because if you're not lying then everything I have thought about myself, since March is. Because it's not true, Nell said. I was nothing. I didn't have a seat on the council, I wasn't even invited to the council, I was a half-blood in a kitchen. Yes, Bram Coyle said. In the kitchen. He looked at her like she was being deliberately slow. Where he ate. The lantern shook. She was holding it. It was her hand. You weren't in the council, Bram said. You didn't need to be. The council never mattered. The council said yes to everything I put in front of it for 20 years, because that's what a council is, girl, it's 12 men in a room, who all want the same 12 chairs next year. He leaned in. The council was mine in a month. Beat. I couldn't buy a woman on a kitchen floor, with flour on her hands, who told him no for free. Nell Ashgrove stood in a room full of 800 sets of illegal armor, with her back against an iron rack, and her hand on a knife she wasn't going to use. And the floor of her life came out, from under her. 6 months. 6 months in a cabin. 6 months of he'd know. 6 months of chopping wood, until her hands split, building 4 winters of firewood for a house she'd never live in, talking to nobody, eating nothing, looking in a cracked mirror at a woman, who was worthless, because a man had said, so in front of 40 people, and he would know, he was the alpha, he was. He hadn't said it. He'd been handed it. You didn't throw me away, because I was weak, she said. Her voice came from somewhere else. No, Bram Coyle said. You threw me away because I worked. And Bram Coyle, 50 years old, beta of Blackmore, the man who taught her, which berries were safe, when she was 19, and new and stupid, and in love, said. You're not garbage, girl. He said it almost gently. You never were. You're the break. He turned. He picked his lantern up off the barrel. And you don't negotiate with a break. He walked toward the stair. You cut the line. He stopped at the bottom step. He didn't look back. Ceremonies at first light, Bram Coyle said. You should sleep. And then he was gone, and his footsteps went up and away, unhurried, a big man in no rush at all. Nell stood in the dark for a long time. Her lantern had gone out. She didn't remember it going out. Somewhere far above her, in a fortress full of wolves, who thought they were at a wedding, a bell rang 5. She put her hand on her throat. On the scar. 6 months she'd carried it as a verdict. Weak wolf. No blood. Cannot command respect. And it wasn't a verdict at all. It was a receipt. Somebody had looked at her, at a small half-blood woman, with flour on her hands, sitting on a kitchen floor saying no, that's stupid to the most powerful man in the territory. And decided she was the single most dangerous thing in that fortress. And paid to have her removed. Nell Ashgrove started to laugh. In the dark. Alone. Under 800 sets of armor. She laughed until she had to put a hand on the rack to stay up, and the mail shirts shifted around her like rain, and somewhere in the middle of it the laugh went somewhere else, and came back, and then it was just her breathing. All right, she thought. All right, Bram. You cut the line 6 months ago. She wiped her face, with the back of a ruined hand. Let's see how the wagon rolls without me. Above her, through 40 feet of stone, the sky over Blackmore was starting to go gray. The sky over Blackmore went the color of wet ash. Not gray. Ash. The flat dead color a fire leaves behind, when it's been out for hours, and nobody's coming back to stir it. The blizzard was an hour off. Maybe 2. You could feel it in the teeth. And in the center of the courtyard, black against all that white, stood the moonstone. A slab of obsidian. Taller than a man. Jutting out of the earth at an angle like something that had been thrown there. It predated the fortress. It predated the pack. It predated the name Marchetti by 600 years. Blood had been spilled on it. Oaths sworn on it. Souls tethered on it. This morning it was going to get all three. Nell stood on the high balcony. Black fox fur. Silver at her throat. Hands on the stone balustrade. Below her, the whole thing was laid out like a diagram. 200 wolves in a ring. Breath rising in white clouds. Pine resin burning in iron braziers, thick and sweet and wrong-smelling. 12 allied alphas. In the front row. All of them. Furs off, out of respect, that's the custom. You don't stand at the moonstone in armor, you stand in what your mother gave you. 12 men. Bare-armed. Unarmed. In a ring. Around a rock. Inside a wall. He didn't even hide it, Nell thought. He didn't have to hide a single thing. He just used the tradition. 600 years of it. Everyone walked in here, and took off their iron, and stood in a circle, because that's what you do, that's what their fathers did. And he built a lock out of it. God, Bram. You didn't build a trap. You just noticed one had been sitting here for 6 centuries. Rurik was beside her. He hadn't spoken in 9 minutes. He was looking down at 12 unarmed men, and Nell could feel the effort coming off him. Physically. The way heat comes off a stove. Because every instinct in that enormous body was screaming, go down there. And he wasn't going. Because a woman had told him not to at 2 in the morning, and he'd listened. Nell. If this doesn't work. Then we were both wrong, she said. And I'd rather be wrong on the balcony than right in the north. Silence. Then, very quietly. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. Down below, they came out. Aldrich Marchetti and Ottoline Vane. Ceremonial white. Soft leather, unarmored, no fur. That's the tradition, you come to the stone the way you came, into the world. Cold. Bare. Ready to be looked at. Nell watched him walk. And here's the thing that got her. He looked terrible. Not nervous. Terrible. The rugged confidence that had been on that man's face since he was 17 years old, the thing that had made her laugh, once, in a kitchen, with flour in his hair, was simply gone. He walked like a man in a dream, where his legs don't work right. Dark craters under the eyes. Skin the color of the sky. He hadn't slept. Good, she thought. And then, unexpectedly, from somewhere much deeper and much older. Oh, Aldrich. You poor stupid hollow thing. You still don't know, do you? You still think last night was the worst part. Ottoline walked beside him. Serene. Composed. A mask so perfect that Nell, who now knew exactly what was under it, could find no seam in it anywhere. But her shoulders were rigid. And at the gate, for 1/2 of 1 second, she looked up. Straight up. At the balcony. At Nell. And she gave the smallest nod in the recorded history of nodding. 1/4 inch. Nothing. Less than nothing. The riders went. Nell's hands closed on the balustrade. The riders went at 3. Karst Hollow's 40 miles. Greywater's 60. Fenmark's 90 and hard. They can't be here by dawn. They just have to arrive. Bram Coyle stood at the stone. Officiating. Of course he was. He'd officiated the last 3. He'd officiated Aldrich's father's funeral. He was 50 years old, and built like a barn door, and he was holding a silver bowl and a ceremonial dagger, and he looked, to 200 wolves, like the most reliable man in the north. He looked up at the balcony. He found Nell. And Bram Coyle inclined his head. Politely. The way you nod at somebody across a room at a party. You absolute. You are enjoying this. You've been alone with it for 20 years, and now there's one other person in the world who knows and you're enjoying it. The chanting started. Low. Guttural. 200 throats going at once, a hum that came up through the stone and into her feet and sat in her chest like a second heart. It's supposed to be unity. It's supposed to be joy. It sounded like a dirge. It sounded exactly like a dirge, and Nell wondered, distantly, how many weddings had sounded like this, and nobody had said anything. Aldrich took the dagger. He drew it across his left palm. The blood came up instantly, dark, shocking, violent against the white leather of his sleeve. He held his hand over the bowl. Drip. Drip. And then he stopped. No. No, 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 don't. Don't you dare. His head came back. His eyes went up. Past the banners. Past the smoking braziers. Up the granite face of his own fortress. To the balcony. And Nell Ashgrove and Aldrich Marchetti looked at each other across 100 feet of freezing air. And she watched him understand. That's the only way to describe it. She watched it arrive on his face like weather crossing a valley. Because he wasn't looking at a woman he'd loved. He was looking at the last 3 years. And she could see him doing the arithmetic she'd done in a stable at midnight, 600 horses, and where are the men, and who bought them, and who told me to. She watched him get to the answer. And she watched him understand that he hadn't lost a mate. He'd lost the only person who had ever said no to him and made it stick. And that 20 years of somebody else's patience had won. The second the brake came off. His hand started to shake. A drop of blood missed the bowl. It hit the snow at his feet and sat there. Perfect. Red. Round. Say it. Say it out loud, Aldrich. Right now. 200 witnesses. Say Bram Coyle, and this ends without a single body. Come on. Come on. You said how once? In a kitchen. Say something now. He opened his mouth. Ottoline Vane took the dagger out of his hand. Snatched it. Fast and clean. She cut her own palm without a flicker. Squeezed her fist over the bowl. Her blood went in and mixed with his. And Nell, 100 feet up, closed her eyes for 1 second. Right. Of course. Because if he says it now, alone, unarmed, in a ring, with 800 sets of armor 40 feet below him, he's dead in 9 seconds, and so is everybody who heard him. She just saved his life. The woman he bought. She just saved his life, and he has no idea. Bram Coyle began the final invocation. The old words. The ones that tether 2 souls in the sight of the pack. His voice was warm. Steady. Grandfatherly. He'd have made a wonderful priest. The words rolled out over the courtyard. And Nell watched his left hand. Because that's what she'd been watching for 4 minutes. Not his face. His face was a performance. His left hand. It was down at his side. Fingers loose. Watch the hand. Watch the hand, watch the hand, watch the... The invocation finished. A cheer went up from the Blackmore wolves. Loud. Dutiful. Empty as a drum. And Bram Coyle's left hand came up and made a small, unhurried, perfectly casual gesture. 2 fingers. Like a man waving off a servant. 3 things happened at once. The great iron gates of Blackmore Fortress swung shut. The bar came down, with a sound like a mountain clearing its throat. And 40 archers stood up on the wall. The courtyard did not scream. That's the part nobody believes, afterward. 200 wolves and nobody screamed. They just stopped. All at once. 200 faces turning up toward the wall in perfect unison, and the chanting cut off mid-syllable, and there was a silence, so total that Nell could hear the braziers. 12 alphas. Bare-armed. In a ring. 40 bows. Drawn. Now. Now. Aldrich Marchetti turned around. Slowly. He looked at his own gates. Closed. He looked at his own wall. Full of archers. And he looked at Bram Coyle. And he said, and it carried, in that silence it carried all the way up to the balcony, and Nell would hear it for the rest of her life. Bram? Not an accusation. A question. The voice of a boy at a funeral asking where his father went. Bram Coyle looked back at him with enormous, weary patience. And said nothing at all. 40 archers stood on the wall of Blackmoor Fortress, with their bows drawn. And did not loose. 1 second. 2. Bram's head turned. Up. At the wall. 3. And the beta of Blackmoor made the gesture again, sharper this time, the first ungraceful movement Nell had ever seen the man make. And 40 archers turned. And put 40 arrows on Bram Coyle. That's it. That's the one. Nell's hands came off the balustrade. Because those weren't his archers. They hadn't been his archers since 4:30 this morning, when 12 of Rurik Vance's men came up out of a culvert in a birch stand half a mile east, and walked into a fortress, through a tunnel that a paranoid old man had cut 60 years ago, and never told anyone about, except his son, who told his son, who told a 19-year-old half-blood girl he thought was funny. And because Blackmoor's archers were Blackmoor's warriors. And Blackmoor's warriors had spent last night in the Outer Bailey. Drinking. With 18 of the king's riders. And somewhere around the third cup, one of those riders had said, casually, the way you mention weather, strange thing about the Western packs not being invited, eh? You cannot buy an army in one night. But you don't have to. You just have to make 400 men ask one question they hadn't thought to ask before. He didn't invite Karsthollow? He didn't invite Greywater? Why not? The east gate came apart. Not opened. Came apart, 600 years of iron and oak going in one enormous crash, and through the hole came Karsthollow. 40 miles in 4 hours in the dark. Their alpha was 61 years old, and he'd hunted with Aldrich's father for 20 years, and he came, through that gate, with his sword out, and his mouth open in a sound that wasn't a word. Behind him, Greywater. And behind Greywater, distant, coming up the road, a line of horses so long it disappeared, into the birch stand. Fenmark. All 3. 90 miles. Hard. They arrived. They. The courtyard exploded. Bram Coyle ran. That was the thing that told Nell she'd been right. He didn't fight. He didn't shift. He didn't shout an order. He turned around and ran for the North Storehouse. Because the only thing that mattered anymore was 40 feet under it, hanging on iron racks in the dark. 800 sets of armor. Give a man an army with no iron and he's a mob. Give him iron and he's a war. Nell was already moving. She came down the servants' stair 3 at a time. She'd taken that stair 1,000 times carrying laundry. Out through the kitchen. Past the ovens. Through the herb door. And out into the courtyard, where 200 wolves were coming apart. Nobody saw her. Nobody looked at her. Because she was small, and her scent was nothing, and there was a war on, and a woman running, through smoke is a shadow, is a shape at the corner of the eye, is nothing at all. Thank you, Aldrich. Thank you very much. She hit the Undercroft stair 4 seconds behind him. He was at the door. The new door. New oak, new iron, new hinges. He had his hand on it. And Nell Ashgrove stopped at the bottom of the stair and put herself between Bram Coyle and 800 sets of armor. He looked at her. 50 years old. 260 pounds. 20 years of patience. And a 26-year-old half-blood woman in a fox fur cloak, with a hunting knife and lungs full of fire. Move, Bram said. No. Nell. No. He didn't sigh. He didn't threaten. He simply began to walk toward her, the way a barn walks toward you in a bad dream, and Nell understood, with total clarity, that she was going to lose. Fast. She would lose fast. Okay. Okay. You can't fight him. You have never been able to fight anyone. That's the whole point of you. That's the entire. So don't. So. What are you, Nell? What did he call you? 20 years, Nell said. He kept coming. 20 years and you never told anyone. Closer. Not one person. Not a wife. Not a friend. 20 years, Bram, you sat at that man's table and served his father and his grandfather, and you never said it out loud once. 2 steps. That's a long time to be the only one who knows how clever you are. He stopped. There. There it is. Get out of the way, girl. Make me. I will. You won't, Nell said. Because you've got about 90 seconds to get that door open, and you're standing here talking to me, which means part of you wants to, which means... Nell. Which means you've been alone with it for 20 years, and now there's exactly one person alive who knows what you did and how good it was, and you can't stand to kill her before she's finished being impressed. Silence. I'm not impressed, by the way, Nell said. I want to be clear. I think you're a small sad man who couldn't get anyone to say yes to him honestly, so he spent 2 decades on a fortress full of people who trusted him. Bram Coyle's face changed. But it was clever, she said. The tradition. Using the tradition. Nobody had to hide anything, because 6 centuries did the hiding for you. I'd have never seen it. Beat. You know who saw it? She smiled. A woman you personally had thrown in a ditch for being useless. He came at her. He came at her fast, and he got a hand in the fox fur, and Nell went off her feet, and into the stair rail hard enough that something in her shoulder made a sound she'd think about for years. And the door at the top of the stair came off its hinges. 12 royal riders came down that staircase like water out of a broken dam. It took 4 of them to put Bram Coyle on the ground. 4. He didn't shift. He didn't beg. He went down under 4 men in iron, and he never made a sound, and the last thing Nell saw, before somebody's shoulder blocked her view, was his face. Absolutely calm. Like weather. Kill him. Rurik Vance was on the stair. He'd come down behind his men, and there was blood on his forearm that wasn't his, and his voice had nothing human in it at all. No, Nell said. Nell. No. She got up. Her shoulder screamed. She got up anyway. You kill him now, in a cellar, with no witnesses, and in 6 months he's a martyr. In 6 months there's 4 men in the crags telling a story about how the king murdered a beta in the dark, because he asked too many questions. She pointed at the ceiling. At the courtyard. At the war. You've got 19 alphas up there. Right now. Standing in the snow, confused, angry, and all of them are about to spend the rest of their lives telling their grandchildren about today. She looked at Rurik. So let's give them something worth telling. They took Bram Coyle alive. And in the crate. Under the bowstrings. 2nd minute of the search. They found a folded piece of vellum, with a broken red seal. Sharp handwriting. Slanting hard right. Your presence is required. It is time you accepted your place. Aldrich Marchetti's own hand. In a box of bowstrings. In an armory that did not exist, 40 feet under a storehouse, in a fortress full of horses nobody was riding. You cannot argue with that. It took 4 days. Not a trial. There's no such thing in the north. It was worse. 19 alphas in the Great Hall of Blackmore. 19. The 12 who'd been invited, and the 7 who hadn't, sitting in the same room for the first time in 11 years, all of them cold sober, all of them listening. And Bram Coyle talked. That was the thing nobody expected. He talked. Freely. Almost eagerly. Because he was 50 years old, and he'd been alone with it for 20 years, and there was, finally, an audience. He laid it out. All of it. The horses. The iron. The list with 7 packs on the wrong side of a pencil line. The plan to take the Western Shelf and blame the dead for it. 3 alphas. Grandfather, father, son. 20 years. And on the 3rd day, somebody asked him about the woman. And Aldrich Marchetti had to stand there and hear it. Stripped of his title on day 1. Standing in the middle of the floor, that floor, the stone one, the exact one, with no chain, no crimson, no crest. And Bram Coyle explained, in a warm and reasonable voice, to 19 alphas and 200 wolves, exactly how he had talked a frightened 30-year-old boy into tearing the heart out of the only person in the world who'd ever told him the truth for free. He explained the timber levy. He explained the karst hollow grazing dispute. He explained the noise Aldrich made when he tilted his head. And he explained that it had taken him a week. 1 week. To convince the alpha of Blackmore that a woman on a kitchen floor was worthless, using words that Aldrich had then repeated, in this room, to 40 people, with total conviction. He believed every one, Bram said. Pleasantly. He's very easy to talk to. Nell watched Aldrich Marchetti's face come apart. And she felt nothing. She'd checked. She went looking, the way she had at a woodpile, reached down into herself expecting something. Triumph. Grief. Something. Nothing. Just a man standing on a stone floor learning that everything he'd built himself out of had been handed to him by somebody who'd never once believed a word of it. He didn't get to die. That was the sentence. Exile, stripped, no pack, no name. He got to live with it. And Nell, standing at the back of the hall, thought that was about right. The snow came in hard on the 5th day. The black carriage was in the courtyard. 30 riders mounted. Iron clinking. And Bram Coyle was in the middle of it all, chained, kneeling in the slush, waiting for a wagon that would take him north to a stone room he'd never come out of. Nell walked across the courtyard. She was wearing wool trousers, a heavy sweater, and a fur-lined coat. No velvet. No silver at her throat. The scar was showing. She let it. She stopped 2 feet from him. Well inside the space where a man like Bram Coyle expects people to stop. He looked up. And Nell reached into her coat pocket. And pulled out a creased, water-stained piece of vellum with a broken red seal. They'd given it back to her that morning. Evidence, taken and filed, and returned, because it was hers. It had always been hers. Somebody had handed it to her at a woodpile in the dead woods, and told her it was a summons. She held it up. Bram Coyle looked at it. He didn't take it. You called me the break, Nell said. Quiet. Completely without malice. Just a statement of fact. She reached out. And tucked the invitation into the front pocket of his coat. And patted the pocket. Once. A gesture so dismissive that a 50-year-old man in chains physically flinched. You were right. She turned her back on him and walked away and did not look back once. She went out to Aldrich on the last morning. He was standing by the moonstone, with nothing but the clothes on his back. He looked at her, and there was nothing left in his face. No arrogance. No anger. He looked like a man who'd been emptied and hung out to dry. Nell. Don't. He stopped. I'm not here for that, she said. You want absolution? I don't have any. I ran out about 6 months ago. She looked at him. I'm here because I want you to know one thing, and then I'm never thinking about you again. Silence. You said huh, Nell said. He blinked. In the kitchen. When I told you the levy was stupid. You said huh, and you changed your mind, and I loved you for it for 3 years. Her voice didn't shake. That was the only good thing in you. And you let a man take it out with a spoon, because he told you it was a weakness. She turned to go. Nell. She stopped. Didn't turn around. I'm sorry. And Nell Ashgrove said. I know. And walked away. Adeline Vane was at the gate. 24 years old. Widow of nothing. Bride of a man who no longer had a name. Standing in a blizzard in a fur wrap, with her chin up, while 19 alphas argued about her fortress. They'd made her acting alpha of Blackmore that morning. Because there was nobody else. Because the beta was in chains, and the alpha was gone, and the council had been Brams for 20 years, and she was the only wolf standing in that place who both sides could stomach. Also, and Nell noticed that nobody said this part out loud, because she'd sent 3 riders at 3 in the morning, without asking anyone's permission. They looked at each other. You're keeping the name, Nell said. Vane. Yes. Your father's going to be furious about the timber road. My father, Adeline said, can walk it. Nell laughed. Once. Surprised. They shook hands. That was all. No embrace. No promises. 2 women standing in the snow, with a fortress full of wreckage behind them, gripping hands for about a second and a half. It was enough. Nell. She turned back. Adeline Vane's mask was gone. Just for a moment. And underneath it was a 24-year-old woman, who was extremely frightened, and had absolutely no intention of showing it to anybody ever again. He said you'd walk into a room and no one would notice. Beat. Everyone noticed. The carriage rolled out through the broken east gate. Snow coming down thick now. The wheels crushed it flat, and the sound went away behind them. Nell sat back against the leather. And the thing in her shoulders, the thing that had lived there for 6 months, the tension, the low permanent brace, went out of her all at once. She felt light. Almost hollow. The ghost was dead. She'd killed it in a cellar, with a conversation. They rode a long time in silence. Wind outside. Hooves. The road climbing steadily out of the pine, and back toward the high frozen country. Rurik Vance sat across from her. He'd been quiet for 11 miles. I came to Blackmore with 30 riders, and no idea what was underneath it, he said. To the window. You came with a folded piece of paper and knew everything. Nell didn't say anything. I nearly died in that courtyard because I thought power was enough. He turned his head. It isn't. I'm 48 hours into learning that, and I don't like it. Let him sit in it. She let him sit in it. Then he put his hand out. Not grabbing. Not reaching for hers. He simply rested it, palm up, on the leather seat next to her knee. An invitation. A real one, this time. A council seat, Rurik said. Not a reward for playing a part. An offer to the woman who played it. Nell looked at his hand. Enormous. Scarred. Open. I'll take it, she said. One condition. Name it. I get to tell you no. She looked up. Out loud. In front of other people. Not in a corridor, not privately, not after. In the room. Where they can hear it. Silence. Because that's what happened to me, Rurik. Somebody figured out I was the only one who'd say it, and he had me removed, and it took me 6 months, and a war to work out that it wasn't a punishment. It was a promotion nobody told me about. Her jaw set. So if I'm going to do it again, I'm doing it where everybody can see. Because the next Bram Coil needs to know that taking me out won't be quiet. Rurik Vance started to laugh. It came up out of him rough and real, and it drowned out the blizzard, and the driver up top flinched. That's exactly why I need you, he said. He shook his head. I've got a hall full of men who nod. Generals who tell me what I want. Nobles who smile to my face and write letters behind it. 12 years. He looked at her. I don't need another wolf. Beat. I need a break. Nell put her hand in his. His fingers closed. Warm. Solid. Absolutely grounding. And there was no spark. There were no stars. No fated mate lightning. No golden thread snapping into place across the universe. Just the firm, unbreakable grip of two survivors recognizing steel in each other. That was better. That was so much better. So I have to wear the corset again, Nell said. Rurik's mouth curved. Only when we've got company to terrify. He let go and sat back. Rest of the time, the king commands that you wear whatever you damn well please. The carriage climbed. Behind them, Blackmore went under the snow, the fortress, the courtyard, the black stone, all of it going gray, and then white, and then gone. Nell put 2 fingers against the base of her throat. Pale. Jagged. Rough at the edges. It didn't hurt. 6 months she'd thought it was the mark of a woman somebody threw away. It wasn't. It was a bite mark. Somebody had to chew through her to get past.